Vivian Carter made the worst decision of her life the moment she grabbed a stranger's arm at the Blackthorn estate and whispered, "There you are, honey." The ballroom fell silent. Because the man she'd just claimed as her fake boyfriend wasn't some harmless guest, he was Lucian Moretti, the most feared mafia boss on the East Coast. A man politicians cross streets to avoid. A man who could end lives with a phone call. Yet instead of destroying her for the lie, Lucian slid his hand around her waist and played along. And when her ex-boyfriend saw who she was standing beside, the color drained from his face. What started as a desperate escape from humiliation became something far more dangerous, because the mafia boss couldn't stop looking at the small-town teacher who accidentally chose him. If you want to see how this story ends, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. Let's check. The grand ballroom of the Blackthorn estate looked like something ripped from a fever dream. Crystal chandeliers dripping light across marble floors, champagne towers glittering like liquid gold, and enough wealth concentrated in one room to fund a small country. Vivian Carter stood near the entrance in her emerald dress, feeling like a fraud wrapped in silk she couldn't afford. She didn't belong here. Everyone else moved through the space like they owned it. Women in couture gowns that cost more than Vivian's annual salary, men in tailored suits discussing deals that shaped cities. Meanwhile, Vivian taught third grade in a Chicago public school where half her students showed up hungry and the heating barely worked in winter. But her best friend Maya had married into the Blackthorn family 6 months ago, and Maya had begged Vivian to attend tonight's anniversary celebration. So here she stood, clutching a champagne flute she hadn't touched, trying not to stare at the famous faces drifting past. A senator laughed too loud near the bar. A tech billionaire checked his phone while his wife smiled at nothing. Somewhere in the crowd, Vivian recognized a news anchor she'd seen on television, now looking older and more tired in person. The whole room felt like a performance where everyone knew their lines except her. Vivian was considering escaping to the bathroom when she saw him. Ethan Mercer. Her ex-boyfriend stood across the ballroom beside a blonde woman wearing a dress that probably cost more than Vivian's car. The woman laughed at something Ethan said, touching his arm with casual ownership, and Vivian felt her stomach twist. She hadn't known Ethan would be here tonight. They dated for 2 years before he dumped her last spring, claiming he needed more ambition in a partner. Translation: Vivian wasn't wealthy enough, connected enough, impressive enough. She was just a teacher who loved her students and went home to a cramped apartment every night. Not good enough for Ethan's rising career in corporate law. Now he was here with someone who clearly fit his upgraded standards. Vivian turned away, hoping to disappear into the crowd before Ethan noticed her. But the universe wasn't that merciful. "Vivian?" His voice cut through the music. She froze. Ethan approached with that confident smile he always wore, the one that used to make her feel safe but now just felt condescending. The blonde followed half a step behind, curiosity sharpening her gaze. "I thought that was you," Ethan said, eyes traveling down Vivian's dress in a way that felt more like an appraisal than appreciation. "What are you doing here?" The question landed like an insult. "Maya invited me," Vivian managed, hating how small her voice sounded. "Right, Maya." Ethan nodded like he'd forgotten Vivian existed outside their relationship. "This is Claire. Claire, this is Vivian. We dated back when I was still figuring things out." Back when I was still figuring things out. As if Vivian had been some trial run, a practice relationship before the real thing. Claire extended a perfectly manicured hand. "It's nice to meet you. What do you do?" "I'm a teacher," Vivian said. "Oh." Claire's smile didn't change, but something flickered behind her eyes. Pity, maybe, or dismissal. "That's so sweet. Ethan mentioned you worked with kids." Sweet. Like Vivian was a child herself. Like her entire career could be reduced to a harmless hobby. Ethan seemed to sense the tension because he shifted closer to Claire, his hand settling possessively on her hip. "Claire works in venture capital. We actually met through her firm. They're investing in my company's expansion." Of course they were. Vivian felt the humiliation crawling up her spine, hot and sharp. This was exactly what Ethan wanted, for her to see him thriving while she remained stuck in her small-town teacher life. "Well," Vivian said, forcing brightness into her voice, "it was good seeing you both." "You came alone?" Ethan interrupted, glancing around like he expected someone to materialize beside her. The question hung there, ugly and obvious. Yes, she'd come alone, because she didn't have a boyfriend, because she spent most nights grading papers and watching Netflix, because her life hadn't magically improved after Ethan left. Actually, Claire said with false sympathy, if you're here by yourself, you should join us. We're meeting some friends near the terrace. It might be fun for you to... I'm not alone. The lie came out before Vivian could stop it. Ethan's eyebrows lifted. You're not? No, Vivian said, heart hammering. My boyfriend is just... He's around here somewhere, probably talking business. Claire exchanged a glance with Ethan, and Vivian saw the disbelief written across both their faces. They didn't buy it. Why would they? Vivian had always been terrible at lying. Really? Ethan said slowly. What's his name? Panic flooded Vivian's chest. She needed to get out of this conversation immediately before she dug herself deeper into the hole. But then Ethan smiled, that same superior smile he'd worn when breaking up with her, and something inside Vivian snapped. She wasn't going to let him win. Not tonight. So Vivian did the stupidest thing she'd ever done in her life. She scanned the ballroom desperately, searching for literally anyone who could play along for 30 seconds. Most of the guests were clustered in groups, laughing and drinking, oblivious to her crisis. But then she spotted a man walking past, alone, moving through the crowd with the kind of quiet confidence that made people step aside without realizing why. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair styled just carelessly enough to suggest he didn't try too hard. His suit was black and perfectly tailored, expensive in a way that didn't scream but whispered. Sharp jawline, cold eyes, the kind of face that belonged on magazine covers selling watches or cologne. Vivian didn't recognize him, but he was walking in her direction, and she was out of options. So she stepped forward, grabbed his arm, and said loudly enough for Ethan to hear, "There you are, honey. I've been looking everywhere for you." The man stopped. Vivian felt his muscles tense beneath her fingers, solid as steel beneath the fabric. For half a heartbeat, nothing happened. The ballroom noise continued around them, laughter and music and clinking glasses. But in their immediate bubble, silence spread like ice. Then the man turned his head slowly and looked at her. His eyes were dark. Not warm brown or friendly hazel, just dark. Empty in a way that made Vivian's survival instinct scream that she'd made a terrible mistake. She'd grabbed the wrong person. Around them, conversations died. Heads turned. A woman in a red gown actually gasped, hand flying to her mouth. Vivian didn't understand why until she heard Ethan's strangled whisper behind her. Holy shit. The man Vivian had claimed as her boyfriend stared at her for 3 long seconds. His expression revealed nothing, no anger, no confusion, just a blank assessment that made her feel like a bug under glass. Then something shifted in his face. Not a smile. Not quite. But his hand moved, sliding around Vivian's waist with casual ownership, pulling her against his side like they'd done this 1,000 times before. "Sorry," the man said, his voice low and smooth as expensive whiskey. "Lost track of time. You know how it is." Vivian's brain short-circuited. He was playing along. This complete stranger was actually pretending to be her boyfriend instead of calling her insane or pushing her away. "It's fine," Vivian managed, trying to sound natural despite her heart trying to break through her ribs. The man's hand tightened slightly on her hip, a warning, maybe, or just maintaining the illusion, and he turned that empty gaze toward Ethan and Claire. The temperature in their little circle dropped 10 degrees. "Friends of yours?" the man asked Vivian, though his eyes never left Ethan's face. Ethan looked like he'd seen a ghost. All the color had drained from his skin, leaving him gray under the chandelier light. Beside him, Claire had gone very still, her champagne flute frozen halfway to her lips. "This is Ethan," Vivian said, finding her voice. "My ex-boyfriend. And Claire." "Ah." The man nodded once, a gesture that somehow carried more menace than a threat. "The ex." The way he said it made it sound like an insult. Ethan tried to recover his composure, forcing his lawyer smile back into place. "I don't think we've met. I'm Ethan Mercer." He extended his hand. The man looked at it like Ethan was offering a dead fish. Then, after a long pause that made sweat bead on Ethan's forehead, the man shook his hand once, brief and dismissive. "Lucien," he said. Just the first name. Nothing else. But the single word hit Ethan like a punch. His face went from gray to white, and his hand dropped back to his side like he'd been burned. "Lucian Moretti?" Ethan whispered. The man, Lucian, didn't confirm or deny. He just kept his hand on Vivian's waist, watching Ethan with the patient stillness of a predator deciding whether something was worth eating. Vivian didn't know who Lucien Moretti was, but clearly Ethan did. Claire had actually taken a step backward, champagne sloshing in her glass. "We should go," Claire said quietly, tugging Ethan's sleeve. But Ethan seemed rooted in place, staring at Lucian like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. I didn't realize you'd be here tonight." "I wasn't planning on staying long," Lucien said, his tone suggesting this conversation was already boring him. But things got more interesting. His hand moved slightly on Vivian's hip, subtle but unmistakable. Ethan's eyes dropped to where Lucian was touching her, and something ugly twisted across his face. Jealousy, maybe. Or fear. Possibly both. "Right," Ethan said weakly. "Well, it was good seeing you, Vivian." He grabbed Claire's hand and practically dragged her away, disappearing into the crowd so fast it would have been funny if Vivian wasn't currently panicking, because the moment they were gone, she'd have to face the man whose arm she'd grabbed, the man everyone seemed terrified of, Lucien Moretti. Vivian waited for him to push her away now that the charade was over. Instead, his hand remained exactly where it was, warm and solid against her hip. "Thank you," Vivian whispered, barely audible over the music. "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to—" "Who was he?" Lucien interrupted, still watching the direction Ethan had fled. "My ex. We broke up last year and I just—" Vivian trailed off, humiliation burning through her chest. "I'm sorry. That was insane. You can let go now." But Lucian didn't let go. He turned to look at her properly for the first time, and Vivian felt the full weight of his attention. Up close, he was even more striking, sharp cheekbones, a mouth that looked like it rarely smiled, and those dark, unreadable eyes that seemed to see straight through her careful composure. "Do you know who I am?" Lucien asked quietly. Vivian shook her head. "No." "Should I?" Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or amusement. Hard to tell. "Probably better that you don't," he said. Then he released her waist and stepped back, creating space between them. Vivian immediately felt colder without his presence anchoring her. "Thank you again," she said, clutching her champagne glass like a lifeline. I should probably go." She started to turn away, ready to flee the ballroom and never show her face in high society again, when Lucien's voice stopped her. "Stay." Vivian froze. "What?" "Your ex keeps looking over here," Lucien said, nodding toward the far side of the ballroom. "If you leave now, you'll look like you were lying." Vivian glanced over her shoulder. Sure enough, Ethan stood near the bar with Claire, but his attention was fixed on Vivian and Lucien, his expression twisted with barely concealed shock. "I was lying," Vivian muttered. "I know." Lucien took her champagne glass and set it on a passing waiter's tray, then extended his hand. "Dance with me." It wasn't a question. Vivian stared at his outstretched hand. Every instinct screamed that getting further involved with this man was a bad idea. People were still watching them, whispering behind cupped hands, and the few who made eye contact with Lucien quickly looked away. Whoever he was, he carried power that made even this wealthy crowd nervous. But Ethan was still watching, and Vivian was so tired of feeling small, so she took Lucien's hand. His fingers closed around hers, firm, warm, confident, and he led her onto the dance floor with the ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. The band was playing something slow and instrumental, couples swaying beneath the chandeliers. Lucien pulled Vivian close, one hand settling on her lower back, the other holding hers with surprising gentleness. They began to move. Vivian had never been a great dancer, but Lucien led so effortlessly that she didn't have to think about it. He guided her through the steps like it was choreographed, his body a solid presence she could lean into without fear of stumbling. "You're really good at this," Vivian said, because the silence felt too heavy. "Practice," Lucien replied. "With all your fake girlfriends?" The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "You're the first." Vivian wasn't sure if he was joking. His expression gave nothing away. Around them, other couples danced, but Vivian noticed how much space people gave them. A subtle but unmistakable buffer, like getting too close to Lucian Moretti might be dangerous. "Everyone's staring at us," Vivian whispered. "They're always staring," Lucian said. "You get used to it." "Why are they scared of you?" The question came out before Vivian could stop it, blunt and tactless. But Lucien didn't seem offended. If anything, he looked almost amused. "You really don't know who I am." "No," Vivian admitted. "And honestly, I'm starting to think I don't want to know." Lucien studied her face, his dark eyes searching for something. "Smart girl." They turned in a slow circle, Vivian's emerald dress fanning around her legs. From across the ballroom, she caught Ethan watching them with an expression caught between disbelief and something darker. "He hurt you," Lucien said quietly. Not a question. Vivian swallowed. "He made me feel invisible, like I didn't matter because I wasn't rich or important enough. And now? Now he looks terrified." Vivian glanced up at Lucien. "Because of you." Good. The single word carried weight, a promise of violence wrapped in silk. Vivian should have been scared. Any reasonable person would be scared. But instead she felt something else, something dangerous and intoxicating. She felt seen. For the first time in months, maybe years, someone was looking at her like she mattered. Not because she was impressive or wealthy or connected, but just because she was here, in his arms, and he'd chosen to play along with her desperate lie. The song ended. Couples around them broke apart, applause rippling through the ballroom. But Lucien didn't release Vivian immediately. He kept her close for an extra heartbeat, his hand warm against her spine. "Thank you for the dance," Vivian said softly. Lucien tilted his head slightly, studying her with that unsettling intensity. "You should stay away from me." "Why?" "Because everyone else does." Then he released her and stepped back, creating distance once again. But before Vivian could respond, a man in a dark suit approached. Younger, maybe late 20s, with the kind of alert awareness that suggested military training. "Boss, the man said quietly, his eyes scanning the room. "We need to go." Boss. So Lucien really was someone important, someone dangerous. Lucien nodded once, then looked back at Vivian. "It was interesting meeting you, Miss Carter," Vivian supplied. "Vivian Carter." "Vivian?" Lucien repeated, like he was committing it to memory. "Try to stay out of trouble." Then he turned and walked away, the younger man falling into step beside him. People parted automatically to let them pass, conversations dropping to whispers in their wake. Vivian stood alone on the dance floor, her heart still racing, watching Lucien Moretti disappear into the crowd. She should have felt relieved. The charade was over. She could go home, forget this ever happened, and return to her normal life of grading papers and eating takeout in her apartment. But instead, Vivian felt the strangest sense of loss, like she'd touched something electric and beautiful, and now the world felt dimmer without it. Oh my God. Maya appeared at Vivian's elbow, eyes wide with shock. Her friend wore a stunning silver gown and diamonds that probably cost more than Vivian's car. Her dark hair swept into an elegant updo. "Did you just dance with Lucien Moretti?" Maya hissed, grabbing Vivian's arm. "I guess," Vivian said weakly. "Who is he?" Maya stared at her like she'd asked who the president was. "Vivian, Lucien Moretti practically runs this city. He's..." She lowered her voice to barely a whisper. "He's Mafia." The word hit Vivian like cold water. Mafia. The man she'd grabbed as her fake boyfriend. The man she'd danced with. The man whose hand had felt warm and safe on her waist. Was a criminal. His family controls everything from real estate to the docks to half the politicians in this room, Maya continued, her voice urgent. People are terrified of him, Viv. Like actually terrified. There are rumors about what happens to people who cross him. Vivian's mouth went dry. What kind of rumors? The kind that end with people disappearing. Maya gripped Vivian's shoulders. What were you thinking? How did you even... Why would you... It was an accident, Vivian said quickly, trying to process this information. Ethan was being awful, and I panicked and grabbed the nearest person, and it just happened to be... Lucien Moretti. Maya finished, shaking her head in disbelief. You accidentally claimed a Mafia boss as your boyfriend. He played along, Vivian said, still not quite believing it herself. He could have pushed me away or called me crazy, but he just went with it. Maya's expression shifted from shock to concern. That's almost worse. Lucien doesn't do anything without a reason. Maybe he was just being nice. Lucien Moretti isn't nice, Viv. He's powerful and dangerous, and Maya cut herself off, glancing around nervously. We shouldn't even be talking about him like this. People notice things. Vivian followed her friend's gaze. Sure enough, several guests were still watching them, whispering behind their champagne flutes. Across the ballroom, Ethan stood frozen near the terrace doors, his face still pale with shock. You need to stay away from Lucien, Maya said firmly. Whatever just happened, it's over now. Don't try to find him. Don't reach out. Just let it go. I wasn't planning on... I'm serious, Vivian. Men like Lucien Moretti destroy everything they touch. Maya squeezed her hand once, then disappeared back into the party, leaving Vivian standing alone on the edge of the dance floor. Destroyed everything they touched. But when Lucien had touched Vivian, she hadn't felt destroyed. She'd felt alive. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Vivian avoided Ethan, fielded awkward questions from people suddenly interested in talking to her, and tried to process what had just happened. By midnight, she was exhausted and ready to escape. She called an Uber and slipped out of the Blackthorn estate, grateful for the cool night air after hours in the stifling ballroom. The car ride home should have given her time to think clearly. Instead, Vivian kept replaying the moment Lucien had wrapped his arm around her waist. The way he'd looked at Ethan like he was nothing. The warmth of his hand on her spine while they danced. Stay away from me, he'd said. Good advice. Vivian had no intention of seeing Lucien Moretti again. When the Uber dropped her off at her apartment building, a modest walk-up in a decent neighborhood, Vivian climbed the stairs to her third-floor unit, unlocked the door, and collapsed on her couch, still wearing her emerald dress. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maya. Are you okay? Call me tomorrow. Vivian typed back a quick reassurance, then tossed her phone aside. She should sleep. Tomorrow was Sunday, which meant she could sleep in, grade the stack of papers waiting on her desk, and forget this entire bizarre night ever happened. But as Vivian lay in the darkness of her apartment, she couldn't stop thinking about those dark eyes, and that quiet voice, and the way her ex-boyfriend's confidence had completely shattered the moment he recognized who she was standing beside. Lucien Moretti. Mafia boss. Dangerous. Off-limits. Everything her sensible, careful life had taught her to avoid. So why couldn't she stop thinking about him? Vivian finally fell asleep around 3 in the morning, still wearing her dress, her dreams filled with crystal chandeliers and cold dark eyes, and the ghost of a hand on her waist. When she woke Sunday morning, sunlight was streaming through her bedroom window, and her phone was buzzing insistently on the nightstand. Vivian grabbed it, expecting Maya, or maybe her mom. Instead, she found a text from an unknown number. Coffee? I know a place that doesn't ask questions. No signature, no explanation. But somehow, Vivian knew exactly who it was. Her hand started shaking. Because Lucien Moretti, the man who everyone said she should stay away from, had found her number. And he was asking her to coffee. Vivian stared at her phone screen until the words blurred. Coffee? I know a place that doesn't ask questions. She should delete the message, block the number, pretend last night never happened, and return to her safe, predictable life of spelling tests and parent-teacher conferences. Instead, her thumbs moved across the screen before her brain could stop them. How did you get my number? The response came within seconds. Does it matter? Vivian sat up in bed, her emerald dress wrinkled beneath her. Outside her window, Chicago buzzed with Sunday morning normalcy, joggers on the sidewalk, a family loading into their minivan, someone walking a golden retriever. Regular people living regular lives. She typed back, yes. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. I asked your friend Maya, told her I wanted to apologize for making you uncomfortable last night. Did you make me uncomfortable? Did I? Vivian's heart hammered against her ribs. She could still feel the phantom warmth of his hand on her waist, the solid presence of his body guiding her across the dance floor. Uncomfortable wasn't the word she'd use. Terrified, maybe. Electrified, definitely. Where? She typed. I'll pick you up in an hour. You don't know where I live. Yes, I do. The casual certainty of those 3 words sent ice down Vivian's spine. He knew where she lived. Had probably known before he even texted, which meant last night hadn't been some random act of kindness. Lucian Moretti had made a decision about her. She just didn't know what kind of decision yet. Vivian's finger hovered over the screen. Every rational thought screamed at her to say no. Maya's warning echoed in her head. Men like Lucian Moretti destroy everything they touch. But Ethan's shocked face kept flashing through her memory. The way he'd looked at her like she suddenly mattered, like she was someone worth fearing. 1 hour, Vivian typed, then immediately regretted it. Wear something comfortable. We might drive. The conversation ended there. No goodbye, no small talk, just instructions delivered with the confidence of someone used to being obeyed. Vivian threw her phone onto the bed and pressed her palms against her eyes. What the hell was she doing? 53 minutes later, she stood in front of her bathroom mirror wearing jeans, a soft gray sweater, and minimal makeup. She'd washed her hair twice, changed outfits 4 times, and nearly texted him to cancel approximately 17 times. But she hadn't, because some self-destructive part of her needed to know what happened next. Her phone buzzed. Downstairs. Vivian grabbed her jacket and purse, locked her apartment, and descended the 3 flights of stairs with legs that felt like water. When she pushed through the building's entrance, she found a black Mercedes idling at the curb. Not a flashy sports car or an ostentatious limousine, just an expensive sedan that whispered wealth instead of shouting it. The driver's side window rolled down. Lucian Moretti sat behind the wheel, wearing a dark Henley and jeans that should have made him look casual, but somehow didn't. He still carried that same quiet danger, like a loaded weapon wrapped in human skin. "Get in," he said. Not a question. Never a question with him. Vivian opened the passenger door and slid inside. The interior smelled like leather and something else. Cologne, maybe. Subtle and expensive. Classical music played softly through the speakers, something piano-heavy she didn't recognize. Lucienne pulled away from the curb before she'd even fastened her seatbelt. They drove in silence for several minutes, heading north toward the lake. Vivian kept stealing glances at him, trying to reconcile this man with Maya's warnings about disappearances and violence. In daylight, Lucienne looked almost normal. Strong hands on the steering wheel, a slight shadow of stubble along his jaw, those dark eyes focused on the road ahead. If you didn't know who he was, you might think he was just another wealthy professional enjoying his Sunday morning. But Vivian noticed the other things too, the way his gaze constantly flickered to the rearview mirror. The phone mounted on the dashboard showing what looked like a security feed, the subtle bulge beneath his left arm that might have been a holster. "You're staring," Lucian said without looking at her. "You're a criminal," Vivian replied before she could stop herself. His mouth twitched. "That's what they tell you?" "Maya said you run half the city, that people disappear when they cross you. And yet you got in my car." Moment of insanity, or curiosity. Lucien glanced at her briefly, those dark eyes unreadable. Which is more dangerous? They turned onto Lakeshore Drive, the water spreading blue and infinite to their right. Early morning sunlight glittered across the surface like scattered diamonds. Joggers and cyclists crowded the path, blissfully unaware of the Mafia boss driving past them. "Where are we going?" Vivian asked. "Coffee, like I said. There are coffee shops near my apartment. Those have witnesses." The casual way he said it made Vivian's breath catch. "Should I be worried?" Lucien was quiet for a moment, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "Probably. That's reassuring." "I'm not trying to reassure you." He shifted lanes smoothly, the Mercedes purring beneath them. "If you wanted safe, you should have stayed home." "Why did you text me?" "Because you interested me." "Why?" Lucien didn't answer immediately. They drove past Millennium Park, past Navy Pier, heading toward neighborhoods Vivian rarely visited. Finally, he said, "You grab my arm in a room full of people who know better. Either you're incredibly stupid or incredibly brave." "Option 1, Vivian muttered. "I don't think so." Lucien turned down a quieter street lined with industrial buildings and shuttered warehouses. "Stupid people don't teach children. They don't save money for months to buy a dress for a party where they don't belong. They don't look a man like me in the eye and ask questions they shouldn't." Vivian's throat tightened. "You researched me." Of course I did. That's standard procedure, Lucian finished. Anyone who touches me without permission gets investigated. It's how I stay alive. The bluntness of it hit Vivian like a slap. This wasn't some romantic movie where the dangerous man turned soft for the right woman. Lucien Moretti lived in a world where trust meant death and background checks were survival. So what did you find? Vivian asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Third grade teacher at Washington Elementary, 27 years old. Student loans almost paid off. No family in Chicago except your friend Maya, no criminal record, no connections to anyone remotely interesting. Lucien pulled into an alley behind a brick building that looked abandoned. You're aggressively normal, Vivian Carter. Sorry to disappoint. I didn't say I was disappointed. He parked the Mercedes and killed the engine. The sudden silence felt heavy, broken only by the distant hum of traffic. Vivian's pulse hammered in her throat. Is this where you murder me? She asked, aiming for humor and landing somewhere near hysteria. Lucien turned to look at her properly for the first time since she'd gotten in the car. His dark eyes swept across her face, lingering on her mouth before meeting her gaze. If I wanted you dead, he said quietly, you'd already be dead. The terrible thing was how matter-of-fact he sounded. Like murder was just another item on his to-do list, somewhere between picking up dry cleaning and answering emails. Great, Vivian whispered. That makes me feel so much better. Lucien's expression shifted, not quite a smile, but something softer than his usual blankness. Come on. He got out of the car. After a moment of internal debate, Vivian followed. The alley smelled like old rain and rust. Lucien led her to an unmarked steel door, knocked twice, then once more after a pause. The door opened immediately. A woman stood in the doorway, maybe 60 years old, gray hair pulled into a bun, wearing a flour-dusted apron. She took one look at Lucien and broke into a warm smile. Luce, she said, pulling him into a brief hug. It's been too long. I've been busy, Rosa. Busy getting into trouble. Rosa's eyes shifted to Vivian, curiosity sharpening her gaze. And who's this? A friend, Lucien said. We need a quiet table. Rosa studied Vivian for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Upstairs. I'll bring coffee. She disappeared back into the building. Lucien gestured for Vivian to follow. Inside, a narrow staircase led up to what appeared to be a private apartment converted into a small cafe. Only 3 tables occupied the space, all empty this early on a Sunday. Exposed brick walls, mismatched furniture, plants hanging from the ceiling. It felt intimate and hidden, like a secret someone had decided to share. Lucien chose the table farthest from the door, positioning himself so he could watch both exits. Old habits, probably, or current necessities. Vivian sat across from him, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. Rosa's been making coffee since before I was born, Lucien said, leaning back in his chair. This used to be my father's place, somewhere he could meet people without attracting attention. People like you? People worse than me. Rosa appeared with 2 ceramic cups and a French press, setting them down gently. Blueberry scones coming up. She squeezed Lucien's shoulder once, gave Vivian another curious look, then retreated downstairs. Lucien poured coffee for both of them, the motion practiced and automatic. Vivian wrapped her hands around the warm cup, grateful for something to hold. Why am I here? She asked. You tell me. Lucien's dark eyes locked on hers. You could have ignored my text, blocked my number, told me to fuck off. Maybe I should have. But you didn't. Vivian took a sip of coffee, rich and dark, better than anything she'd tasted in months. You played along last night, when you could have walked away. I could have. Why didn't you? Lucien was quiet for a moment, his fingers drumming once against his cup. Your ex looked at you like you were nothing. I wanted to see what happened if someone made him think you were everything. The honesty of it stole Vivian's breath. Not some practiced line or smooth deflection, just raw truth delivered without apology. That's... Vivian searched for words. That's either really sweet or really messed up. Probably both. They sat in silence, drinking coffee while early morning light filtered through the windows. Vivian kept waiting for Lucien to make some move, to touch her, pressure her, reveal whatever agenda he was hiding. But he just sat there, watching her with that unnerving intensity that made her feel stripped bare. I looked you up, Vivian admitted, after Maya told me who you were. Find anything interesting? Articles about your family? Your father dying 3 years ago. Rumors about gang wars and political corruption. She met his gaze. Nothing proven, of course, but enough to make it clear you're not someone I should be having coffee with. Smart conclusion. And yet here I am. Here you are. Lucian leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping. You want to know what I am? What I do? I'm not sure I do. Honest. He almost smiled. My father built an empire on violence, extortion, and fear. When he died, I inherited all of it. The legitimate businesses, the illegal operations, the enemies, the blood. Everyone expected me to be exactly like him. But you're not? I'm worse in some ways, better in others. Lucien's jaw tightened. I'm trying to clean things up, move money into legal channels. End the trafficking, the protection rackets, the street violence. But you can't just flip a switch on decades of corruption. Every change I make creates enemies, people who profit from the old ways. So you're what? A reformed criminal? No. The word came out flat and certain. I've done things that can't be reformed. I've hurt people, killed people, made decisions that keep me awake most nights. His eyes never left hers. I'm not looking for redemption, Vivian. I'm just trying to leave something less poisonous behind when I'm gone. The raw honesty hit Vivian like a physical blow. She'd expected denials or justifications, not this brutal self-awareness. Why are you telling me this? She whispered. Because you asked, and because... Lucian stopped, something flickering across his face. Uncertainty, maybe. A crack in his armor. Because most people see what they want to see when they look at me. Fear or greed or opportunity. But last night you looked at me like I was just a man, not a monster, not a meal ticket, just someone. Vivian's throat tightened. I didn't know who you were. Exactly. His voice roughened slightly. Do you know how rare that is? To be seen without the weight of your name crushing everything? Before Vivian could respond, Rosa returned with a plate of warm blueberry scones. The older woman glanced between them, reading something in the tension, then disappeared again without comment. Vivian broke off a piece of scone, buying time to think. Everything about this situation screamed danger. The hidden cafe, the criminal confession, the man across from her who admitted to killing people without a trace of remorse. But underneath that, she felt something else. Recognition. Because Vivian understood being seen only as what you represented. The dedicated teacher. The good girl. The safe choice who'd never amount to anything exciting. Ethan had looked at her and seen limitations. Her family looked at her and saw wasted potential. Even Maya sometimes treated her like a child who needed protecting. But when Lucian looked at her, he saw her. Not the role, not the assumptions, just Vivian. I should go, she said, though she didn't move. This is insane. You're dangerous, and I'm a teacher who alphabetizes her spice rack. I know. We have nothing in common. I know. So why do I want to stay? Lucian's expression shifted, something heated flickering in those dark eyes. Because you're tired of being invisible. The truth of it pierced through Vivian's defenses. Yes, she was tired of being invisible, tired of being dismissed and underestimated and patted on the head like her dreams were cute but ultimately meaningless. Last night, standing beside Lucian Moretti, she'd felt powerful, dangerous, seen, and now she couldn't unknow what that felt like. One coffee, Vivian said, her voice barely steady. That's all this is? Then I go back to my life and you go back to yours, and we forget this happened. If that's what you want. It is. Lucian studied her face for a long moment, then nodded once. Okay. They finished their coffee in loaded silence. Rosa appeared to refill their cups, humming softly to herself. Outside, Chicago woke up fully. Car horns, distant sirens, the constant urban symphony. Inside the hidden cafe, time felt suspended. Tell me something, Lucienne said eventually. Something real, not what you think I want to hear. Vivian hesitated. Like what? Anything. He leaned back, coffee cup cradled in his hands. Surprise me. So Vivian told him about her students. About Jaden, who couldn't sit still for more than 5 minutes but wrote the most beautiful stories when you let him pace. About Sophia, who was reading 3 grade levels ahead but wouldn't speak in class because her accent made other kids laugh. About Marcus, whose dad was in prison and whose mom worked 3 jobs, so he showed up exhausted every morning but never stopped trying. She told him about the funding cuts that meant no field trips, no art supplies, no music program. About parents who blamed her for their children's struggles. About the principal who cared more about test scores than actual learning. And Lucian listened. Really listened. Not with the polite attention people gave when they were waiting for their turn to talk, but with genuine focus. He asked questions, good questions, about classroom dynamics and educational theory and what made some kids thrive while others struggled. It was the strangest conversation Vivian had ever had with someone who'd just admitted to murder. "You love them," Lucian said finally. "Your students." "Of course I do. Not everyone would. Most people see teaching as a job, a paycheck. You see it as—" He paused, searching for words. "A calling." Vivian felt heat creep up her neck. "That sounds dramatic. Doesn't make it wrong." They talked for another hour. About music. Lucien played piano, which somehow surprised and didn't surprise Vivian simultaneously. About books. They both loved thrillers, though Lucien's taste ran darker than hers. About Chicago, which Lucien knew better than anyone Vivian had ever met, every neighborhood's history and hidden corners. By the time they left Rosa's cafe, the sun hung high and bright, and Vivian had almost forgotten she was having coffee with a Mafia boss. Almost. The drive back to her apartment felt shorter. Lucien navigated through side streets, avoiding the main roads, and Vivian realized he was being careful. Avoiding cameras, maybe, or just habits formed from years of looking over his shoulder. When they pulled up outside her building, Lucien killed the engine but didn't move to get out. "Thank you," Vivian said, her hand on the door handle, "for the coffee, and for this." "Vivian," his voice stopped her. She turned back. Lucien stared straight ahead through the windshield, his jaw tight. "This was a mistake." The words hit like cold water. "What?" "Texting you, bringing you to Rosa's, all of it." He finally looked at her, and something in his expression made Vivian's chest ache. "People around me get hurt. It's not a metaphor, it's a fact. And you're—" "What?" Vivian challenged. "Too normal, too innocent, too breakable?" "All of that." "Then why did you text me?" Lucian's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Because I'm selfish. Because for one night you looked at me like I was worth something beyond fear, and I wanted to feel that again." The raw honesty cracked something open in Vivian's chest. She should have gotten out of the car, thanked him politely, and walked away from this beautiful disaster before it consumed her. Instead, she heard herself say, "What if I don't want safe?" Lucien's head snapped toward her, eyes dark and intense. "Don't. Don't what? Don't make me hope." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Don't make me want things I can't have." "Why can't you have them?" "Because wanting things makes you weak, and I can't afford weakness." They stared at each other across the console, the air between them charged with something dangerous and inevitable. Vivian's heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She should go. She really, really should go. Lucian's phone buzzed, shattering the moment. He glanced at the screen, and his entire demeanor shifted, the vulnerability vanishing behind cold professionalism. "I need to take this," he said. Vivian nodded and opened her door, stepping out into the cool Chicago air. She was halfway to her building's entrance when Lucien's voice stopped her. "Vivian." She turned back. He'd rolled down the window, one arm draped over the door. "Stay away from Ethan," Lucian said, "and anyone connected to him." "Why?" "Because I asked." His expression hardened. "And because I meant what I said. People around me get hurt." Then he drove away, the Mercedes disappearing around the corner before Vivian could respond. She stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, her mind spinning. What the hell had just happened? Upstairs in her apartment, Vivian spent the rest of Sunday trying to grade papers and failing miserably. Her thoughts kept drifting back to Lucien's face when he'd said, "Don't make me hope," to the careful way he'd poured her coffee, to Rosa's knowing glances. Her phone stayed silent. Monday morning arrived with typical chaos. 22 third graders hyped up on sugar and weekend freedom, a broken smartboard, and a passive-aggressive email from the principal about age-appropriate reading material after Vivian had let her class read a graphic novel about civil rights. By lunch, she'd almost convinced herself Sunday had been some fever dream. Then Maya called. "Are you insane?" her friend hissed the moment Vivian answered. "Lucien Moretti? Coffee?" Vivian's stomach dropped. "How did you—" "He asked for your number, Viv. Of course I'm keeping tabs." Maya's voice shook with genuine fear. "Do you have any idea what you're doing? Having coffee isn't a crime. With a criminal, it is." Maya took a breath, clearly trying to calm herself. "Look, I love you. You're my best friend, but you need to understand. Lucien Moretti isn't some misunderstood bad boy. He's dangerous, like actually dangerous. The FBI has a file on him 3 inches thick. He told me," Vivian said quietly, "about what he does, what he's done." Silence stretched between them. "He told you," Maya repeated slowly. "And you still went?" "Yes." "Why?" Vivian didn't have a good answer. Or rather, she had 1,000 answers and none of them made sense strung together. Because he saw her, because he listened, because for 2 hours she'd felt more alive than she had in years. "Just be careful," Maya said finally. "Please, I can't lose you." After they hung up, Vivian stared at her phone for a long time. She should delete Lucian's number, block him, move on. Instead, she saved his contact under "Don't Answer" and went back to teaching verb conjugations to 8-year-olds. 3 days passed with no contact. Vivian told herself she was relieved. Life returned to normal. Lesson plans, parent conferences, grocery shopping, Netflix binges in her pajamas. But she kept checking her phone, and every time it buzzed, her heart jumped. Thursday evening, Vivian stayed late at school to set up for Friday's science experiment. By the time she finished, darkness had fallen over Chicago. She gathered her things, locked the classroom, and headed toward the parking lot. A black Mercedes sat near the entrance. Vivian's breath caught. Lucien leaned against the driver's side door, hands in his pockets, looking like he belonged in a magazine ad rather than a school parking lot. He'd clearly been waiting, shoulders tense, eyes scanning the street with that constant awareness. When he saw her, something in his expression shifted, softened. "You shouldn't be here," Vivian said, even as her feet carried her closer. "I know. Someone might see." "I don't care." They stood 3 feet apart, the space between them crackling with tension. Streetlights cast orange shadows across Lucian's face, making his eyes darker and more dangerous. "Why are you here?" Vivian asked. "Because I tried to stay away." His jaw tightened. "I lasted 4 days." "Lucien, calm. I know it's selfish. I know I should leave you alone. I know every logical reason this is a terrible idea." He stepped closer, and Vivian's pulse kicked into overdrive. "But I can't stop thinking about you." The raw admission hung between them. "This is crazy," Vivian whispered. "Yes. You're dangerous. Yes. We barely know each other. Yes. So why does this feel—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Lucien's hand lifted, hovering near her face like he wanted to touch her but wasn't sure he had permission. "Like something inevitable?" "Yes." That single word changed everything. Lucian's fingers finally made contact, brushing along Vivian's jaw with devastating gentleness. His touch burned, made her breath stutter and her knees weak and her common sense evaporate completely. "Have dinner with me," he said quietly. "No more coffee in hidden cafes. Real dinner. Let me do this properly." "Properly?" Vivian almost laughed. "You're a Mafia boss asking out a 3rd-grade teacher in a school parking lot." "Still counts." Against every warning bell screaming in her head, Vivian found herself nodding. "Okay. Tomorrow night. I'll pick you up at 7. Where are we going?" "Somewhere no one will bother us." Lucien's thumb traced her cheekbone once more. Then he stepped back, creating distance before things could spiral further. His eyes lingered on her mouth, dark with wanting, before he forced himself to look away. "Be ready," he said, then got into the Mercedes and drove off. Vivian stood in the empty parking lot, hand pressed to her still tingling cheek, and wondered what the hell she'd just agreed to. That night, she barely slept. Friday dragged endlessly. Her students sensed her distraction and took full advantage. Paper airplanes, spontaneous dance parties, a minor glitter incident that would take weeks to fully clean up. By 3 o'clock, Vivian was exhausted and jittery and questioning every life choice that had led to this moment. Maya called at 4. "Tell me you're not actually having dinner with him." "I'm having dinner with him." "Vivian." "I know, okay? I know it's stupid and reckless, and probably the worst decision I've ever made." Vivian stared at her closet, trying to figure out what one wore to dinner with organized crime. "But I'm doing it anyway." "Then at least be smart about it. Send me his address. Check in every hour. Keep your phone charged." "You sound like my mom." "Your mom would lock you in your room if she knew what you were doing." "Fair point." At 6:30, Vivian stood in front of her mirror wearing a simple black dress and heels, her hair loose around her shoulders. Nothing fancy, but elegant enough for wherever Lucian was taking her. Her phone buzzed at 6:58. Downstairs. Vivian grabbed her jacket and purse, sent Maya a quick "I'm alive" text, and headed down to the street. The same Mercedes waited at the curb, but when Vivian approached, a different man stood beside the passenger door. Younger, early 30s maybe, wearing a dark suit that screamed security detail. "Ms. Carter," he said politely, "Mr. Moretti asked me to escort you." Vivian's stomach twisted. "Where is he?" "Waiting at the restaurant. There was a complication. He sent me to ensure your safety." Red flags exploded in Vivian's mind. This felt wrong. Lucian had promised to pick her up himself. Sending someone else, no matter how polite, sent entirely the wrong message. "I don't think so," Vivian said, backing up a step. "Tell Lucian, please, Ms. Carter." The man's expression remained neutral, but something shifted in his posture. Not threatening exactly, but not casual either. Mr. Moretti was very insistent. "He's waiting." "Then he can wait longer until I hear from him directly." Vivian pulled out her phone to call Lucian herself. That's when she noticed the black SUV parked across the street, and the man inside watching her through tinted windows. The security guard followed her gaze and tensed immediately. His hand moved toward his jacket, toward whatever weapon he carried there. "Get in the car," he said, his polite facade cracking. "Now." "What's happening?" "Ms. Carter, please." The SUV's doors opened. 3 men got out, moving with coordinated purpose. Not running, but walking fast. Intent clear in every stride. The security guard swore under his breath and grabbed Vivian's arm. "In the car, right now." Terror flooded Vivian's system, but she let him push her into the Mercedes. He slammed the door, ran around to the driver's side, and peeled away from the curb with tires screaming. Through the rear window, Vivian watched the 3 men sprint toward another vehicle. "Who are they?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "No one you want to meet." The guard wove through traffic, checking mirrors constantly. His phone was pressed to his ear, speaking rapid fire in what sounded like Italian. "Yeah, I've got her. 3 Tails, black Escalade. No, she's fine. Heading to you now." He listened for a moment, then glanced at Vivian in the rearview mirror. "Boss wants to know if you're hurt." "No, I'm fine. What the hell is going on?" The guard relayed her answer, listened again, then hung up. He took a hard left, then another right, navigating through neighborhoods Vivian didn't recognize. Behind them, headlights followed. "They're still there," Vivian whispered. "I know." The chase lasted 10 more minutes, the longest 10 minutes of Vivian's life. Her driver executed maneuvers that belonged in action movies, turning down alleys, running yellow lights, using the city's grid to their advantage. Finally, the Escalade disappeared. They pulled into an underground garage beneath a building Vivian didn't recognize. Armed men flanked the entrance, faces hard and alert. The guard parked and immediately opened Vivian's door. "This way." Her legs shook as she followed him to an elevator. They rode up in silence, tension thick enough to choke on. When the doors opened, Vivian found herself in a penthouse apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Chicago's glittering skyline. And there, standing in the center of the room with his back to her, was Lucian Moretti. He turned when he heard the elevator. The look on his face, fury and fear twisted together, made Vivian's breath catch. "Everyone out," Lucian said quietly. The security guard and 2 other men Vivian hadn't noticed retreated immediately, the elevator doors closing behind them. Suddenly, she was alone with Lucian in the vast, silent penthouse. "Are you hurt?" His voice came out rough, barely controlled. No, Did they touch you? No, but Lucien, what? He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides and pulled her against him hard, one hand cupping the back of her head, the other wrapped around her waist. Not romantic, not gentle, desperate, like he'd been terrified and was only now allowing himself to feel it. Vivian stood frozen for a heartbeat, then her arms came up around his back, holding on while he held her. I'm sorry, Lucien said into her hair. I'm so fucking sorry. This is exactly what I was trying to avoid. Who were those men? Rivals. Enemies. He pulled back enough to look at her face, his hands framing her jaw. It doesn't matter. What matters is you're not safe around me. You were right to try to stay away. But I didn't stay away. You should have. His thumbs brushed her cheekbones, the gesture heartbreakingly tender coming from someone so dangerous. I should have left you alone. Why didn't you? Lucian's dark eyes searched hers. Because I'm selfish. Because knowing you exist and not seeing you feels impossible. His jaw tightened. Because when I'm with you, I remember what it's like to want something besides power and control. What do you want? The question hung between them, loaded and inevitable. Lucian's gaze dropped to her mouth, then back to her eyes. You. I want you, Vivian, and that's the most dangerous thing I've ever admitted. Before she could respond, his phone buzzed insistently. Lucien pulled it out, read something on the screen, and his entire expression hardened into something cold and lethal. They know who you are, he said quietly. Your name, where you work, where you live. He looked at her, and Vivian saw genuine fear behind the anger. This isn't a game anymore. My enemies will use you to get to me. The words settled over Vivian like ice. What do I do? Lucien was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with something. Finally, he said, you have 2 choices. I can arrange protection, security watching your apartment, guards outside your school, surveillance to make sure you're never alone. You go back to your normal life, but you'll always be looking over your shoulder. Or, his hands tightened on her face, or you stay with me. Here, where I can protect you properly. Where my enemies can't reach you without going through an army. Lucien's voice dropped. But that means stepping fully into my world. No more pretending this is just coffee or dinner. You become mine, and everyone knows it. Vivian's heart hammered. That's insane. Reckless. Probably the worst decision you could make. Lucien's thumb traced her bottom lip, the touch electric. But it's the only way I can guarantee your safety. And Vivian, his voice cracked slightly, I will burn this entire city down before I let anyone hurt you. The raw possessiveness in those words should have terrified her. Instead, they made something fierce and wild unfurl in Vivian's chest. She thought about her quiet apartment, her careful, predictable life, the safety she'd built around herself after Ethan shattered her confidence. Then she thought about Lucien's hand on her waist at the Blackthorn estate, the way he listened when she talked about her students, Rosa's knowing smile, the feeling of being seen for the first time in years. She thought about living in fear, always wondering when danger would find her, or stepping fully into the fire and at least feeling alive while she burned. How long? Vivian whispered. How long what? If I stay here, if I do this, how long until it's safe again? Lucien's expression turned bleak. I don't know, maybe weeks, maybe months. He paused. Maybe never. The honesty should have sent her running. Instead, Vivian heard herself say, okay. Lucien went very still. Okay, what? I'll stay. Vivian, I'll stay, she repeated, stronger this time. But on one condition. Anything. You tell me the truth. About everything. No more secrets. No more protecting me from reality. She met his dark gaze steadily. If I'm stepping into your world, I need to see it clearly. For a long moment, Lucien just stared at her. Then slowly, carefully, like he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing, he nodded. Deal. His hand slid from her face down to her shoulders, and Vivian saw the exact moment the reality of what she'd agreed to hit him. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by cold calculation. Then we do this properly, Lucien said. Tomorrow, we move your essential things here. I'll arrange protection for your school. Discreet, but present. Your friend Maya and anyone else close to you get security detail whether they know it or not. Lucien, this isn't negotiable. His voice turned to steel. You chose to stay. That means you follow my rules when it comes to safety. The sudden shift from vulnerable to commanding should have annoyed her. Instead, Vivian found it strangely reassuring. Whatever else Lucien was, he knew how to protect people, even if those people needed protecting because of him. What happens now? She asked. Lucien's hand found hers, threading their fingers together. Now you see what you've gotten yourself into. He led her deeper into the penthouse, past the living room with its floor-to-ceiling windows, past a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a magazine, down a hallway lined with art that probably cost more than Vivian would earn in a lifetime. At the end of the hall, Lucien opened a door. Inside was a bedroom 3 times the size of Vivian's entire apartment. King bed with black silk sheets, another wall of windows overlooking the city, a door leading to what looked like a massive bathroom. This is yours, Lucien said. Your space. I'm across the hall. You can lock the door if you want privacy. The security system is... Lucien. He stopped, turning to look at her. Where do you want me to sleep? The question hung between them, weighted with implications neither of them were quite ready to examine. Lucien's jaw tightened. That's not... We don't have to... I'm not asking what we have to do. I'm asking what you want. He stared at her for a long moment, conflict written clearly across his face. Want warring with restraint. Desire fighting against the knowledge that whatever this was between them came with costs neither of them had fully calculated yet. I want, Lucien said quietly, to not be a selfish bastard for once in my life. That's not an answer. Yes, it is. He released her hand and stepped back, creating distance. You just made the most dangerous decision of your life, Vivian. Don't compound it by rushing into something you can't take back. The rejection stung, even though Vivian knew he was right. Tomorrow we'll move your things, Lucien continued, his voice carefully neutral now. Tonight, you sleep. There's food in the kitchen, anything you need. I'll be in my office making calls, damage control. And Vivian? She looked up at him. Thank you, he said, for trusting me. Then he left her standing in the enormous bedroom, alone with her racing thoughts and the terrifying knowledge that she'd just stepped past the point of no return. Vivian didn't sleep. She lay in the massive bed surrounded by silk sheets that cost more than her monthly rent, staring at the ceiling while Chicago glittered beyond the windows. Every sound made her jump, the hum of the ventilation system, distant sirens, footsteps in the hallway that might have been Lucien or might have been security guards she hadn't met yet. Around 3 a.m, she gave up and wandered into the kitchen wearing the spare clothes someone had left folded on her dresser. Men's sweatpants rolled at the waist, a soft t-shirt that smelled like expensive detergent. She wondered whose clothes they were, then decided she didn't want to know. The kitchen was all marble and stainless steel, the kind of space designed for professional chefs rather than someone who lived on frozen pizza and cereal. Vivian opened the massive refrigerator and found it stocked with everything: fresh vegetables, expensive cheeses, containers of what looked like homemade pasta sauce. She settled for water. Can't sleep? Vivian spun around, water sloshing over her hand. Lucien stood in the doorway wearing dark pants and a wrinkled dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked exhausted, shadows under his eyes, hair disheveled from running his hands through it, tension carved into every line of his body. You scared me, Vivian said. Sorry. He moved into the kitchen, keeping distance between them like he didn't trust himself to get closer. I should have made noise. It's your apartment. It's yours now, too. The words hung there, strange and intimate. Vivian set down her water glass, suddenly hyper-aware of how she must look. No makeup, hair tangled, drowning in borrowed clothes. Did you sleep at all? She asked. No. Lucien opened a cabinet and pulled out a bottle of whiskey, pouring 2 fingers into a glass. He held it up questioningly toward Vivian. She nodded. He poured a second glass and slid it across the counter. They stood on opposite sides of the marble island, drinking expensive whiskey at 3 a.m, 2 people who barely knew each other pretending this situation was remotely normal. I've been making calls, Lucien said finally, calling in favors, putting pressure on the right people to find out who sent those men after you. And? His jaw tightened. Still working on it, which meant he didn't know. Which meant whoever wanted to hurt Vivian was good enough to hide from Lucien Moretti's considerable resources. That thought settled like ice in Vivian's stomach. "How long have you lived here?" she asked, needing to talk about anything except the danger circling them. 3 years, since my father died and I took over. Lucien took another sip of whiskey. He lived in the family estate outside the city. Big house, lots of land, guards everywhere. I wanted something different. More isolated? More honest. He gestured at the windows. Out there I could pretend to be normal. Here, the city reminds me every day what I am. Vivian studied his face in the dim kitchen light. "And what are you?" A man trying to clean up his father's mess while his enemies wait for any sign of weakness. Lucian's dark eyes met hers. "And you, Vivian Carter, are the biggest weakness I've shown in years." The admission should have felt romantic. Instead, it felt like a warning. "I'm sorry," Vivian whispered. "Don't be." Lucian set down his glass with careful precision. "I chose this. I texted you. I showed up at your school. Every step of the way, I made choices that put you in danger. I made choices too. You made choices without all the information. I knew better." They fell silent. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm. Cars on distant streets, the occasional wail of sirens, lights blinking in windows across the skyline. Normal people living normal lives, while Vivian stood in a mafia boss's kitchen at 3 in the morning, drinking whiskey and wondering how her life had spiraled so far off course. "Tell me something," Vivian said. "Something true. About you?" Lucien raised an eyebrow. "Such as?" "Anything. You know everything about me. I know almost nothing about you except what's in the news articles, and those are probably half lies anyway." He was quiet for a long moment, considering. Then he said, "My mother left when I was 7. Couldn't handle what my father was, what he did. She tried to take me with her, but he wouldn't allow it. Said I was his heir, his legacy, and she could leave if she wanted, but I stayed." Vivian's throat tightened. "Did you ever see her again?" "Once, when I was 16, and she'd remarried, moved to California, started a whole new family." Lucian's expression remained neutral, but his knuckles whitened around his glass. "She looked happy, really happy, and I realized she'd escaped something I never would." "That's not... It's fine." He cut her off gently. "I'm not looking for sympathy. You asked for something true." "That's true." Vivian wanted to go to him, to close the distance and offer comfort, but something in Lucian's posture warned her off. This wasn't a moment for touch. This was him giving her exactly what she'd asked for, unvarnished truth. "Your turn," Lucian said. "Something true." "I was engaged once," Vivian heard herself say, "before Ethan. When I was 22, right out of college. His name was Daniel, and we'd been together since sophomore year." "What happened?" "He wanted me to give up teaching, said we'd never afford the life he wanted on a teacher's salary. He had this whole plan. I'd get my MBA, go into corporate training, make real money." Vivian stared into her whiskey. "When I said no, he called off the engagement 3 weeks before the wedding." "He's an idiot." "Maybe. Or maybe he was right, and I'm the idiot for thinking you can build a life on passion instead of pragmatism." Lucien moved then, finally crossing the kitchen to stand directly in front of her. Close enough that Vivian could smell whiskey and cologne and something else. Soap, maybe? Or just him? "Listen to me," he said quietly. "You chose teaching because you give a damn about those kids, because you believe education matters, and you're willing to be broke and exhausted and underappreciated if it means reaching even one of them. That's not being an idiot. That's having principles," says the man who runs a criminal empire. "Especially," says that man. Lucien's hand lifted to her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone. "I've spent my whole life around people who'd sell their own mothers for profit. You're the most ruthlessly principled person I've ever met." The compliment landed wrong, twisted somehow. Vivian pulled back slightly. "I'm not principled. I grabbed your arm at a party to make my ex-boyfriend jealous. I lied to strangers. I agreed to move in with someone I barely know because it felt exciting and dangerous, and I was tired of being invisible." "So you're human," Lucian said. "That doesn't erase the rest." Before Vivian could respond, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. Lucian glanced at the screen and his entire demeanor changed, softness vanishing, replaced by cold focus. I need to take this, he said, already moving toward his office. Stay here. Don't go near the windows. Then he was gone, and Vivian was alone again in the too-big kitchen, her whiskey glass still half full, wondering what fresh disaster required Lucian's attention at 3 in the morning. She found out at sunrise. Vivian had finally dozed off on the living room couch when voices woke her. Lucian's low and controlled, another man's sharper with agitation. She sat up, disoriented, just as Lucian appeared in the doorway with a man she didn't recognize. Early 50s, expensive suit, the kind of face that suggested he smiled often in public and never in private. Ms. Carter, the man said, his voice smooth as oil, I'm Vincent Calabresi. I handle Mr. Moretti's legal affairs. Lawyer, then, which meant whatever was happening required legal counsel at dawn. What's going on? Vivian asked, looking between them. Lucian's expression was carefully blank. We have a problem. Vincent opened his briefcase and pulled out a tablet, tapping the screen before handing it to Vivian. These photos were sent to several media outlets this morning. So far, we've managed to keep them from being published, but that won't last. Vivian looked at the screen and felt her stomach drop. Photos of her and Lucian. From the Blackthorn Estate gala, dancing, his hand on her waist, her face tilted up toward his. More photos from outside her apartment building when he'd picked her up for coffee. The two of them at Rosa's cafe, visible through the window. Outside her school, Lucian's hand on her cheek. Someone had been following them, documenting everything. Who took these? Vivian whispered. We're working on identifying the photographer, Vincent said, but that's not the primary concern right now. He swiped to another image. Vivian's teaching license, her home address, the names of her students, photos of Washington Elementary with children's faces visible in the playground. They're threatening the school, Lucian said, his voice flat and dangerous. Whoever's behind this wants to make it clear they can reach you anywhere, including through your students. The words hit Vivian like a physical blow. Her students, 8-year-olds who had nothing to do with any of this, suddenly dragged into danger because she'd been stupid enough to grab a stranger's arm at a party. The school board received an anonymous tip this morning, Vincent continued, suggesting you're involved with organized crime. They're calling an emergency meeting to discuss your employment status. Vivian's hand shook. They're going to fire me. Not if we handle this correctly. Vincent took back the tablet. Mr. Moretti has several options. No. Vivian looked at Lucien. No buying off the school board. No threatening anyone. No making this worse. It's already worse, Lucien said quietly. They're using your career as leverage. Then I'll resign. Vivian, I'll resign, she repeated, stronger now, before they can fire me, before this becomes a media circus that follows those kids for years. I'll walk away. The silence that followed felt suffocating. Vincent cleared his throat. That might actually be the cleanest solution. A resignation citing personal reasons, no connection to Mr. Moretti mentioned publicly. Get out, Lucian said, not looking away from Vivian. Vincent hesitated. Sir, we need to get out. The lawyer grabbed his briefcase and left quickly, the door closing with a soft click. Lucien crossed to Vivian in 3 strides, his hands framing her face. You're not resigning. I'll fix this. I'll find whoever took those photos and make them disappear. I'll pay off the school board, buy the whole fucking school if I have to. And prove them right? Vivian pulled away from his touch. Prove I'm exactly what they think I am? Some teacher who got involved with a criminal and let it contaminate everything she touched? You're a teacher who fell into something you didn't ask for. I asked for it the moment I grabbed your arm. Vivian's voice cracked. I knew what you were, Lucian. Maya warned me. You warned me. And I chose this anyway because it felt exciting and I was tired of being careful. So what are you saying? I'm saying those kids don't deserve to have their education disrupted because I made selfish choices. Vivian wrapped her arms around herself. I'll resign. Find another school district, maybe somewhere outside Chicago. Start over. Lucian's jaw tightened. They'll follow you. Whoever's doing this won't stop just because you change schools. Then what do you suggest? Stay here. Let me protect you. Let me handle this. By making people disappear? Vivian's voice rose. By using violence and threats and all the things you said you were trying to move away from. The accusation hung between them, ugly and true. If that's what it takes, Lucian said quietly. And there it was. The fundamental truth Vivian had been avoiding since that first night at the Blackthorn estate. Lucien Moretti might want to be better, might be trying to clean up his empire, but at his core, he was still a man who solved problems with force. "I need air," Vivian said, moving toward the windows. "Don't." Lucy Sheet reached for her. "The windows aren't safe." "Nothing's safe!" The words exploded out of her. "I'm not safe in my apartment, not safe at my job, not safe in this goddamn penthouse surrounded by armed guards. So what difference does it make if I stand near a window?" She crossed to the floor-to-ceiling glass anyway, staring out at Chicago waking up below. Normal people heading to normal jobs, living normal lives. Everything she'd given up the moment she decided to play along with a lie. Behind her, Lucien's phone rang again. He answered with a curt, "What?" then went very still. Vivian turned around. The color had drained from Lucien's face. His hand tightened around the phone, hard enough that she heard the case crack. "When?" he asked, his voice deadly calm. A pause. "How many?" Another pause, longer this time. "I'm on my way." He hung up and looked at Vivian, and the expression on his face made her blood turn to ice. "What happened?" "Rosa's cafe." Lucien's voice came out flat, emotionless, the tone of someone forcing themselves not to feel. "Someone burned it down 3 hours ago. Rosa was inside." The words didn't process at first. Vivian's brain refused to connect them into meaning. "Is she dead?" The single word dropped like a stone. "They barred the doors and set it on fire. She never had a chance." Vivian's knees buckled. She caught herself against the window, hand pressed to the glass. Rosa. Sweet Rosa, who'd hugged Lucien and made them coffee and smiled like she knew secrets about the world that made it bearable. Dead. Because of them. "This is my fault," Vivian whispered. "No." Lucien crossed to her, his hands on her shoulders. "This is whoever's targeting us. This is calculated, deliberate. We led them there." Vivian's voice broke. "We went to her cafe and someone followed us and now she's dead because I wanted to feel special for 2 fucking hours." "Vivian, don't." She shoved him away, suddenly desperate for space. "Don't tell me it's not my fault. Don't tell me this is just how your world works. That woman is dead because I was stupid enough to think I could play in your world without consequences." Lucien's mask finally cracked. "You think I don't know that? You think I'm not standing here calculating exactly how I failed to protect her?" His voice rose, raw with grief and fury. "Rosa helped raise me after my mother left. She was the only person from my childhood who never asked me for anything except to be decent. And I got her killed by bringing you there." The accusation hung between them, cruel and honest. "Then we both got her killed," Vivian said quietly. They stared at each other across the living room, 2 people drowning in guilt with no life raft in sight. Lucien's phone rang again. He looked at it like it was a live grenade, then answered. "What?" A pause. His expression went from grief to something harder, colder. "You're sure?" Another pause. "Send me everything." He hung up and turned to Vivian. "They found the photographer who took those pictures." "And?" Lucien's jaw tightened. "He's been dead for 3 days, dumped in the river with 2 bullets in his head." Vivian's stomach turned over. "I don't understand." "Someone hired him to follow us, then killed him to cover their tracks." Lucien pulled up something on his phone, stared at it for a long moment, then handed it to Vivian. But before he died, he uploaded his files to a secure server. My people just cracked it. Vivian looked at the screen. More photos. Her and Lucien at the Blackthorn estate. Outside her apartment. But also new images. Lucien meeting with men in expensive suits, exchanging briefcases. Lucien in what looked like a warehouse, guns visible on a table. Documentation of criminal activity that would bury him if it went public. "They're not just targeting you," Vivian said slowly. "They're targeting both of us." "Yes. But why?" She stopped, a horrible realization dawning. "Unless they want you distracted, want you focused on protecting me instead of whatever else you should be paying attention to." Lucien's expression confirmed her theory. "There's a vote happening next week," he said quietly. "A vote within the organization about whether I stay in charge. I've been pushing too hard for reforms. Ending the trafficking, cleaning up the money, cutting ties with corrupt politicians. Half my father's old guard wants me gone. So they created a target for you, made you vulnerable. And it worked. Lucien's voice turned bitter. I spent the last 3 days focused on keeping you safe instead of shoring up my alliances. I left myself exposed. Who's leading the opposition? My uncle. My father's younger brother, Marco. Lucien took back his phone. He's been waiting for an opportunity like this since the day my father died. Vivian's mind raced. If you lose the vote, I lose everything. The empire, the protection, probably my life. Lucien met her eyes, and anyone connected to me becomes a liability, which means you. The full scope of the trap finally became clear. Someone, Marco probably, had engineered this entire situation, used Vivian to distract Lucien, to make him look weak and emotional and unfit to lead. And when the vote came, Lucien would fall, and Vivian would fall with him. Rosa wasn't collateral damage, Vivian said, horror settling like lead in her chest. She was a message. Yes. Showing you they can reach anyone you care about. Yes. So what do we do? Lucien was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I can still win this. If I move fast, call in every favor, show strength instead of weakness. He looked at her. But it means I can't be distracted. Can't be protecting you while fighting a war on 3 other fronts. Then don't protect me. The words came out before Vivian fully thought them through. Let me go. Publicly cut ties, make it look like I meant nothing. Give your uncle no leverage. No. Lucien, no. His voice turned to steel. I won't sacrifice you to save myself. Even if it means losing everything? Even then. The raw certainty in those words should have been romantic. Instead, Vivian felt trapped, because Lucien's refusal to let her go meant they'd both burn when Marco made his move. There has to be another option, she said desperately. There is. Lucien's expression hardened into something frightening. I can do what my father would have done. Find Marco and everyone supporting him and eliminate the problem permanently. Murder. War, he corrected. This stopped being murder the moment they burned Rosa alive. Vivian stared at him, finally seeing clearly what she'd chosen. Not a man trying to reform his empire. A man who'd resort to mass violence the moment he felt cornered. That's what you meant, she whispered. When you said you were worse than your father in some ways, you're more ruthless. Yes. More willing to burn everything down rather than lose. Yes. So you'll start a war. Kill everyone who opposes you. And then what? Rule through fear like your father did? Prove your uncle right that you're too dangerous to lead? Lucien's mask cracked again, frustration and grief and rage all bleeding through. What would you have me do, Vivian? Sit here and wait while they pick apart everything I've built? While they kill everyone I care about to prove a point? I don't know, her voice broke. But I know Rosa wouldn't want you starting a war in her name. I know she'd tell you to be better than this. Rosa's dead. The flat delivery of those words, emotionless, final, made Vivian flinch. I'm going to deal with my uncle, Lucien continued, his voice cold and controlled again. You're going to stay here where my security can protect you. And when this is over, we'll figure out what happens next. And if you lose, I won't lose. But if you do, then it won't matter what happens to you because we'll both be dead. He crossed to her, his hands framing her face with surprising gentleness given the violence in his words. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I dragged you into this. I'm sorry Rosa died because of my failures. But I'm not sorry I met you, even if it costs me everything. Then he kissed her, hard and desperate and tasting like whiskey and grief. Vivian's brain short-circuited, caught between pushing him away and pulling him closer. His hands tightened in her hair, his body solid against hers, and for one desperate moment she let herself fall into it. Let herself forget Rosa's death and the photographs and the war brewing around them. But reality crashed back too quickly. Vivian broke the kiss, pressing her palms against Lucien's chest. Don't what? Don't kiss me like you're saying goodbye. Lucien's expression shifted, something broken and honest bleeding through his control. What if I am? Then I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. You don't get to make that decision alone, Vivian's voice steadied. You said I'm yours, that everyone knows it. So if you're walking into a war, I'm not sitting here waiting to find out if you survive. Vivian, no? She cut him off. You told me to stay with you if I wanted protection. You told me you'd burn the city down before letting anyone hurt me. So now I'm telling you, you don't get to protect me by dying. You stay alive. You win this vote, and we figure out how to survive this mess together. For a long moment, Lucien just stared at her. Then, slowly, something like hope flickered in his dark eyes. Together, he repeated. Together. His phone buzzed again. The third interruption in an hour. This time when Lucien answered, his expression went from cautious hope to pure ice. When? He demanded. A pause. How many? Another pause, and Vivian watched his knuckles turn white around the phone. I'm on my way. He hung up and looked at Vivian, and she knew before he spoke that everything had just gotten infinitely worse. Marco just made his move, Lucien, and said quietly. He's called an emergency vote for tonight. Either I show up and face him directly, or he wins by default. Tonight? Vivian's voice rose. You said next week. I know what I said. He moved the timeline. Lucien was already moving toward his office, typing furiously on his phone. He's forcing my hand before I can shore up support. Classic ambush tactic. So what do? Lucien stopped in the doorway, his back to her. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone making an impossible choice. I go to the vote. I face Marco directly, and I either win or I die trying. He turned around, and Vivian saw real fear in his eyes for the first time. And Vivian, if I don't make it back, if this goes wrong, there's a car in the garage with keys in the ignition and $50,000 cash in the trunk. Drive to Wisconsin. There's a cabin under a false name, coordinates in the glove box. Stay there until you hear from Vincent that it's safe. I'm not... Promise me. Lucien crossed back to her, gripping her shoulders. Promise me you'll run if this goes bad. Vivian wanted to argue, to insist she'd fight beside him, to make brave declarations about staying together no matter what. But looking into his eyes, she saw the truth. This vote wouldn't be won with words, and if Lucien lost, she'd only slow him down when he needed to move fast. I promise, she whispered. Lucien kissed her forehead once, gentle and heartbreaking, then released her. I have to go prep. Stay in the penthouse. Don't answer the door for anyone except me or Vincent. He headed toward his bedroom. And Vivian? She looked at him. If I don't come back, he said quietly, forget you ever knew me. Forget all of this. Go back to teaching. Find a man who doesn't come with enemies and death. Live the quiet life you deserved before I ruined everything. Then he disappeared into his room, leaving Vivian standing alone in the living room with Chicago sprawling below her and the taste of goodbye still on her lips. She pressed her hand to the window glass, watching the city wake up below. Rosa was dead. Lucien was walking into what might be his execution, and Vivian had no idea how to stop any of it. For the first time since grabbing a stranger's arm at the Blackthorn estate, she understood the true cost of her impulsive lie. Not humiliation or embarrassment, but blood. And no amount of wishing could take it back. Lucien was gone within the hour. Vivian watched from the penthouse windows as 3 black SUVs pulled away from the building, their taillights disappearing into Chicago's morning traffic. She pressed her forehead against the glass, her breath fogging the surface, and tried to calculate how long she had before everything fell apart. The penthouse felt like a tomb after he left. Too quiet. Too still. Armed guards patrolled the hallways, but their presence only amplified the silence instead of breaking it. Vivian's phone buzzed with a text from Maya. Are you okay? I heard about the school board meeting. News traveled fast, apparently. I'm fine, Vivian typed back, the lie tasting bitter even through text. Don't worry about me. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, where are you? Vivian stared at the question. She couldn't tell Maya the truth, that she was hiding in a Mafia boss's penthouse while he prepared for what might be his execution, that a woman had burned to death because Vivian wanted to feel special, that everything in her carefully constructed life had imploded in less than a week. Somewhere safe, she typed. I'll call you soon, I promise. She silenced her phone before Maya could respond. The morning crawled past with agonizing slowness. Vivian tried to distract herself, turned on the television only to find news coverage of Rosa's cafe fire, tried to read but couldn't focus, attempted to grade papers she'd stuffed in her bag, but the words blurred together. Around noon, Vincent Calabrese arrived with 2 large suitcases. "Your belongings from your apartment," he said, setting them in the guest bedroom. "Mr. Moretti arranged for everything essential to be packed. If anything's missing, let me know and I'll have it retrieved." Vivian opened the first suitcase and found her clothes neatly folded, her favorite books stacked on top, the framed photo of her parents she kept on her nightstand carefully wrapped in bubble wrap. Someone had gone through her entire apartment, selecting what mattered, packing her life into 2 bags. The intimacy of it made her skin crawl. "Thank you," she managed. Vincent hesitated in the doorway. "Miss Carter, I want you to know Mr. Moretti has made arrangements. If tonight goes poorly, you'll be taken care of, financially secure, protected. I don't want his money." Nevertheless, Vincent's expression softened slightly. "He cares about you, more than I've seen him care about anyone since his father died. Whatever happens tonight, know that he's fighting as much for you as for himself." Then he left, and Vivian was alone again with her neatly packed life and the crushing weight of guilt. The afternoon stretched into evening. Vivian watched the sun sink toward Lake Michigan, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that looked too much like fire. She thought about Rosa burning, about Lucien walking into a room full of enemies, about all the ways this could end badly. At 6 o'clock, her phone rang. Unknown number. Vivian almost didn't answer. Then something, instinct maybe, or desperation, made her swipe to accept. "Hello? Miss Carter?" The voice was male, older, with the kind of smooth confidence that came from decades of getting what he wanted. "My name is Marco Moretti. I believe you know my nephew." Vivian's blood turned to ice. "How did you get this number?" "I get every number I want." A pause. "I'm calling because I think we can help each other." "I doubt that." "Hear me out." Marco's voice carried false warmth, like a shark trying to sound friendly. "My nephew has put you in a terrible position, endangered your career, your safety, your entire future. And for what? A few weeks of excitement?" Vivian said nothing. "I'm offering you a way out," Marco continued. "Tonight's vote doesn't have to involve you. You can walk away right now. I'll ensure the photos never see daylight, the school board drops their investigation, and you return to your normal life. No consequences. No danger." "In exchange for what?" "Information." The word dropped casually, like it cost nothing. "Tell me where Lucien is right now, which route he's taking tonight, who's with him. Just a few simple details, and this all goes away." Vivian's grip tightened on her phone. "You want me to help you kill him?" "I want you to help yourself." Marco's voice hardened slightly. "Because make no mistake, Ms. Carter, Lucien is going to lose tonight, with or without your help. The only question is whether you're dragged down with him." "Go to hell." She hung up, hands shaking violently. Marco called back immediately. Vivian declined the call. He called again and again. On the 4th attempt, she answered just to scream, "Stop calling me!" "One more thing," Marco said, unbothered by her outburst. "Before you commit to dying beside my nephew, you should know he's not coming back for you." "What?" "The vote is scheduled for 8 o'clock. It's nearly 6:30 now. And where's Lucien?" "Not here with you. He's making deals, calling in favors, preparing for war. You're an afterthought, Ms. Carter, a distraction he's already written off." "You're lying." "Am I?" Marco's voice turned almost sympathetic. "Ask yourself, if you really mattered to him, would he have left you alone all day? Would he be focused on his empire instead of ensuring your safety? Lucien is his father's son, no matter what he tells himself. And his father's first rule was simple: loyalty to the organization above all else. Lucien's not like that. Keep telling yourself that. But when you're running for your life tonight because he chose power over you, remember, I offered you a way out." The line went dead. Vivian stood frozen in the middle of the penthouse, Marco's words echoing in her head. He was trying to manipulate her. She knew that. Trying to drive a wedge between her and Lucien, to isolate him further before the vote. But a small, poisonous part of her whispered that maybe Marco was right. Lucien had left her here alone all day. No calls, no updates. Nothing but Vincent's brief visit. If she really mattered more than his empire, wouldn't he have checked in? Wouldn't he be here instead of preparing for battle? Vivian's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She opened it and found a video file. Against every instinct screaming not to, she pressed play. The footage showed Lucien in what looked like a private dining room, sitting across from a man Vivian didn't recognize. The timestamp read 3 hours ago. "Can't afford distractions," the man was saying. "This teacher, Lucien, she's become a liability." "I know." Lucien's voice came through clearly, cold and measured. "I'm handling it." "Are you? Because from where I'm sitting, you've spent the last week playing house with a civilian while Marco's been consolidating power. The girl is temporary." Lucien's expression on the grainy video remained impassive. "A miscalculation that won't be repeated." Vivian's breath stopped. "The girl is temporary. A miscalculation." "So what's your play?" the other man asked. "After tonight's vote, she goes back to her life. I'll arrange security from a distance, make sure Marco's people leave her alone. But that's it. Clean break." "And if she doesn't want a clean break?" Lucien was quiet for a moment, then said something that shattered Vivian completely. "Then she'll learn that wanting something and being able to keep it are very different things." The video ended. Vivian stood in the silent penthouse, staring at her phone screen, feeling like she'd been gutted. Temporary. A miscalculation. Clean break. Every word Lucien had spoken to her that morning about burning the city down to protect her, about fighting together, about not being sorry he'd met her, suddenly rang hollow. He'd been planning to cut her loose all along. Vivian's phone rang again. Marco. This time she answered. "I watched your video," she said, her voice empty. "I thought you might." Marco sounded satisfied. "So now you understand. My nephew cares about power, Ms. Carter. Everything else is negotiable. What do you want from me?" "Just answer one question. Is Lucien at the penthouse right now?" Vivian looked around the empty apartment. "No." "Where is he?" "I don't know. He left this morning and I haven't heard from him since." "Interesting." A pause. "You know what I think, Ms. Carter? I think you're exactly as disposable as Lucien suggested, which means helping me costs you nothing. He's already decided you don't matter." "Why should I believe you'd keep your word?" Vivian asked. "Even if I helped you, what's to stop you from coming after me anyway?" "Because you're nobody." Marco delivered the insult casually, like stating a fact. "No offense, but you're a third-grade teacher from Chicago. You're not a threat. You're not worth the effort of eliminating. The only reason you matter right now is because Lucien made you matter by association. Remove the association, and you're invisible again." The twisted logic almost made sense. "I need time to think," Vivian said. "You have until 7:30. After that, I assume you've made your choice." Marco's voice softened into something almost kind. "For what it's worth, Ms. Carter, I'm sorry you got caught up in this. You seem like a decent person. You deserve better than being used as a pawn in someone else's war." He hung up. Vivian set down her phone and walked to the windows, pressing both palms against the glass. Chicago sprawled below her, millions of lives intersecting and diverging, none of them aware that somewhere in this city a vote was about to happen that would determine whether she lived or died. She thought about the video. Lucien's cold dismissal, the calculated way he'd described her as temporary. Then she thought about his hands framing her face that morning, the fear in his eyes when he'd made her promise to run if things went bad, the way he'd kissed her like he was memorizing the taste. Which version was real? The man who called her a miscalculation, or the man who'd looked terrified at the thought of losing her? Vivian's phone buzzed with a text from Vincent. "Mr. Moretti wanted you to know he's thinking of you. The vote begins in 90 minutes. She stared at the message for a long time. Then she made a decision. Vivian grabbed her jacket and the keys to the emergency car Lucien had mentioned. She didn't know where the vote was happening, but she knew someone who would. She pulled up Marco's number and typed, "I'll help you, but I need to see you in person first, to make sure you'll keep your word." The response came within seconds. "Smart girl. Where are you?" "The penthouse. Come alone. 20 minutes." Vivian pocketed her phone and looked around the penthouse one last time. She was either about to make the smartest decision of her life or the stupidest. But she refused to sit here like a helpless damsel while men decided her fate. If Lucien really had written her off, then she'd save herself on her own terms. And if he hadn't, if the video was manipulated or taken out of context or just Marco playing games, then she'd find a way to help him survive the night. Either way, she was done waiting. 18 minutes later, the elevator chimed. Vivian stood in the center of the living room as Marco Moretti stepped out. He was older than she expected. Early 60s, gray hair, immaculately styled, wearing a suit that probably cost more than her car. He looked like a retired businessman, not a mafia underboss staging a coup. But his eyes told a different story. Cold, calculating, patient. Ms. Carter. He smiled warmly, like they were old friends. Thank you for seeing reason. I haven't agreed to anything yet, Vivian said. I want guarantees. Of course. Marco moved into the room with casual confidence, glancing around like he owned the place. Maybe he thought he would soon. What would make you comfortable? Proof that you can actually protect me. That the photos won't leak, the school board investigation goes away, all of it. I can provide that proof. Marco pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, then showed her the screen. These are the original photo files. Watch. He pressed delete. The files disappeared. The photographer's backup server, he continued, navigating to another screen. Also deleted. And here, he pulled up an email thread. My confirmation to the school board that their anonymous tip was from an unreliable source and should be disregarded. He'd already done it. Already wiped the evidence, called off the dogs, erased her connection to Lucien from the public record. Why? Vivian asked. If you've already cleaned this up, why do you still need information from me? Marco's smile widened. Because I want to make sure I chose the right person to spare. You see, Ms. Carter, I could have killed you. It would have been easy. A tragic accident, wrong place, wrong time. But I prefer cleaner solutions. You help me tonight, and you get to return to your nice, quiet life. Everyone wins. Except Lucien. Lucien made his choices. Just like you're making yours. Marco pocketed his phone. So, tell me, where's my nephew planning to be before the vote? Who's he meeting with? What's his strategy? Vivian's mind raced. She'd brought Marco here planning to, what? Trick him somehow? Get information? She hadn't thought beyond needing to do something instead of sitting helpless. He's meeting supporters at a restaurant downtown, Vivian said, the lie coming easier than expected. Gathering allies before the vote. I don't know which restaurant, but he left around noon. Marco studied her face, searching for deception. You're lying. I'm not. He didn't tell me details, just said he had meetings and I should stay here. Then how are you planning to help me? Vivian swallowed. I thought I could call him, convince him to meet somewhere, and you could ambush him? Marco laughed. Ms. Carter, you're not cut out for this world. It's almost charming. His expression hardened. But I don't have time for games. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to call Lucien right now and tell him you're in danger, that someone broke into the penthouse. He'll come running. He won't be able to help himself. And when he does, my people will be waiting. No. No? Marco's eyebrows lifted. I don't think you understand your situation. I understand perfectly. Vivian's voice steadied. You've been playing me this whole time. That video was edited, probably not even from today. You needed me to doubt Lucien, to turn against him because you know I'm the one thing that might make him vulnerable. Marco's smile vanished. Clever girl. Not clever enough, but getting there. He pulled a gun from inside his jacket, casual, like he was retrieving his wallet, and aimed it at Vivian's chest. Call him, Marco said quietly, or I'll shoot you and use your death to draw him out anyway. At least this way you might survive the night. Vivian's heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Her phone felt like lead in her pocket. He won't come, she said, buying time. He told me himself I'm temporary, a distraction he's already written off. Then you have nothing to lose by making the call. Marco's finger moved to the trigger. 3 seconds, Ms. Carter. 3, 2, okay? Vivian pulled out her phone with shaking hands. Okay, I'll call him. She pulled up Lucien's contact, finger hovering over the call button. Then the lights went out. The entire penthouse plunged into darkness. Marco swore, his gun swinging toward the windows. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, dim red lights along the baseboards, just enough to navigate by. What did you do? Marco demanded. Nothing. I don't know. The elevator chimed. Both of them turned toward the sound. The doors opened, revealing a figure backlit by the elevator's emergency lighting. Lucien Moretti stepped into his penthouse holding a gun of his own, and the expression on his face promised violence. "Hello, Uncle," he said quietly. "Thanks for coming to me. Saves me the trouble of hunting you down." Marco swung his gun toward Lucien, but two things happened simultaneously. First, Vivian lunged forward, slamming into Marco's arm just as he pulled the trigger. The shot went wild, punching through a window instead of Lucien's chest. Second, Lucien fired twice, controlled, precise shots that hit Marco in the shoulder and leg. The older man crumpled, his gun clattering across the marble floor. Then Lucien was crossing the room, kicking Marco's weapon away before checking Vivian with frantic hands. "Are you hurt? Did he touch you?" "I'm fine," Vivian gasped, adrenaline making her voice shake. "I'm okay. How did you—" "I had the building surveilled. The moment Marco entered, I was notified." Lucien pulled her against him briefly, his heartbeat hammering against her chest, then released her to deal with his uncle. Marco lay bleeding on the floor, clutching his shoulder. "You're making a mistake, Lucien. Kill me and you start a war you can't win." "I'm not going to kill you." Lucien crouched beside him, gun still trained on Marco's head. "That would be what our father would do. I'm better than that." "So what then? You turn me over to the authorities? I'll be out in 24 hours. "No." Lucien's voice turned cold. "You're going to the vote tonight. Bleeding, defeated, humiliated. And you're going to tell everyone exactly what you did. How you burned an innocent woman alive. How you tried to kill me using a civilian as bait. How you put personal ambition over the organization's stability. Then you're going to withdraw your challenge and recommend I remain in charge." Marco actually laughed, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. "Why the hell would I do that?" "Because if you don't, I release evidence to every law enforcement agency in the country proving your involvement in the trafficking operations I've been shutting down." Lucien leaned closer. "Unlike you, I actually document my reforms, and I kept detailed records of everyone who opposed them, including which specific operations you personally profited from. You wouldn't. Test me." The two men stared at each other, uncle and nephew, old guard and new, and Vivian watched the calculation happen in Marco's eyes, the weighing of outcomes, the realization that Lucien had outplayed him. "You've become ruthless," Marco said finally. "Your father would be proud." "My father was a monster. I'm just better at being one." Lucien stood, keeping his gun trained on Marco. "So what's it going to be? Humiliation tonight or life in prison?" Marco sagged against the floor, all his confidence bleeding out with the blood pooling beneath him. "You win." "Yes, I do." Lucien pulled out his phone and made a call. "Vincent, I need medical and cleanup at the penthouse. And tell everyone the vote's been moved up. We're doing this now instead of waiting until 8. He listened for a moment. "Because my uncle's going to make his confession while he's still bleeding, more dramatic that way." He hung up and looked at Vivian properly for the first time since arriving. Really looked at her, taking in her tear-streaked face, her shaking hands, the terror still written across her features. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have—" "You called me temporary," Vivian interrupted, her voice breaking. "A miscalculation. I saw the video." Lucien went very still. "What video?" "Marco sent it. You telling someone I was a distraction that wouldn't be repeated? That after tonight, I'd go back to my life and you'd make a clean break." "Vivian, was it real?" She stepped toward him, anger finally breaking through the fear. "Because I've spent the entire day wondering if I was just some stupid civilian you were using as a shield, or if any of this actually meant something to you." "It was real," Lucien said. "The video. That conversation happened." The confirmation hit like a slap. Vivian actually stumbled back a step. "But it wasn't the truth," Lucien continued, closing the distance between them. "It was theater. That man I was meeting with? One of Marco's allies. I knew the room was bugged. I knew everything I said would get back to my uncle. So I said what he needed to hear, that you didn't matter, that I'd cut you loose. I made myself look cold and pragmatic and exactly like the kind of leader who wouldn't let personal feelings interfere with business." "You were lying. I was protecting you." Lucien's hands framed her face. "If Marco thought you were already written off, he'd leave you alone. It's only valuable hostages that get hurt. So you made me look worthless. I made you look invisible. There's a difference. His thumbs brushed away the tears on her cheeks. And Vivian, if I really thought you were temporary, would I have had this entire building monitored just to make sure Marco couldn't get to you? Would I have dropped everything the moment you were in danger? Would I be standing here terrified that you believed his lies? Vivian searched his face, looking for deception, but found only raw honesty. I hate you, she whispered. I know. I hate that you made me doubt you. I hate that Rose is dead. I hate that I can't go back to my normal life. I hate that Her voice broke. I hate that I can't imagine a future that doesn't include you. Lucian's expression cracked, vulnerability bleeding through his careful control. Good, because I can't either. Then he kissed her like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning, hard and desperate and tasting like fear and relief mixed together. Vivian's hand fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, kissing him back with all the terror and anger and hope she'd been holding in all day. On the floor, Marco groaned. Really? Right now? I'm bleeding over here. They broke apart, both breathing hard. Medical's on the way, Lucian said without looking at his uncle. His eyes stayed locked on Vivian. You know you don't have to come to the vote, right? You can stay here. This part, the ugly political warfare, you don't need to see that. I'm coming, Vivian said firmly. Vivian? You told me I was yours, that everyone knew it. So if you're walking into a room full of dangerous men to prove you deserve to lead, I'm walking in beside you. She stepped back, squaring her shoulders. Because I'm not temporary. I'm not a miscalculation. And I'm sure as hell not invisible anymore. For the first time since she'd met him, Lucien Moretti smiled. A real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face from dangerous to devastating. No, he agreed. You're really not. Medical arrived 10 minutes later, a team of professionals who clearly dealt with gunshot wounds regularly and asked no questions. They patched Marco enough to transport him, then loaded him onto a stretcher. Vincent appeared with fresh clothes for Lucien and a bulletproof vest that he insisted Vivian wear under her jacket. Standard precaution, Vincent said when she hesitated. Tonight's vote will be tense. Better safe than sorry. Vivian let him help her into the vest, the weight of it settling against her chest like an anchor. This was really happening. She was really about to walk into a Mafia meeting wearing body armor. Her life had become completely insane. Lucien emerged from his bedroom wearing a fresh suit, his earlier violence hidden beneath expensive fabric and practiced composure. He looked every inch the powerful boss, commanding, controlled, dangerous. But when he looked at Vivian, his mask slipped just enough to show the man underneath. Last chance to stay here, he said softly. Not a chance. They rode down the elevator in loaded silence. Lucien, Vivian, Vincent, and 4 armed guards. When the doors opened in the parking garage, 3 SUVs waited with engines running. Lucien guided Vivian toward the middle vehicle, his hand on her lower back. Stay close to me. Don't speak unless I tell you to. And if anything goes wrong, I run. I know. Vivian met his eyes. But nothing's going to go wrong. You're going to walk in there and remind everyone why they should be terrified of you. Terrified, Lucien repeated. That's the goal? Isn't it always? His mouth twitched. With you around? I'm starting to think respect might be better. They climbed into the SUV. The door slammed shut, sealing them inside with tinted windows and the smell of leather and gun oil. As the convoy pulled out of the garage, Vivian realized her hands had stopped shaking. Whatever came next, violence or victory or something in between, she'd made her choice. She was staying. The drive took 20 minutes, winding through Chicago's South Side toward a warehouse district Vivian had never visited. The kind of area where buildings wore graffiti like scars, and nobody asked questions about what happened behind closed doors. They pulled up outside a massive brick warehouse, its windows dark, a single entrance guarded by men in suits carrying very obvious weapons. This is it, Lucien said. Last chance. Stop asking me that. He almost smiled. Yes, ma'am. They got out of the SUV. Immediately, guards flanked them, Vincent on one side, 2 armed men on the other. Marco was being helped out of the third vehicle, pale and shaky, but conscious. Lucien straightened his jacket, checked that his own gun was secure, then looked at Vivian one more time. Whatever happens in there, he said quietly, know that meeting you was the first good decision I've made in years. Before she could respond, he turned and walked toward the warehouse entrance. Vivian followed, her heart in her throat, walking straight into the fire beside the most dangerous man she'd ever met. The warehouse interior was exactly what she expected, and nothing like she imagined simultaneously. Rows of chairs faced a raised platform, maybe 100 men already seated, all of them radiating barely contained violence. At the front, a table held 3 empty chairs, clearly for whoever was presiding over this twisted court. Every head turned as Lucien entered. The silence was deafening. Then Lucien spoke, his voice carrying across the warehouse with absolute authority. Gentlemen, thank you for gathering on such short notice. I believe my uncle has something he'd like to say. Marco was pushed forward, still bleeding through his hastily bandaged shoulder. He looked at the assembled men, his allies, his supporters, the people who'd backed his play for power. And Vivian saw the exact moment he realized how thoroughly Lucien had destroyed him. Tell them, Lucien said quietly. Tell them everything you did, and then tell them why you're withdrawing your challenge to my leadership. Marco's hands clenched into fists. For a moment, Vivian thought he might refuse, might choose death over humiliation. Then his shoulders sagged, and he began to talk. Marco's confession took 11 minutes. 11 minutes of ugly truth spilling out in the warehouse's dim light, while 100 dangerous men listened in absolute silence. He told them about Rosa, how he'd ordered her cafe burned with her inside just to send a message. About the photographer he'd hired and then murdered to cover his tracks. About manipulating the school board, threatening Vivian's career, staging the entire crisis to make Lucien look weak and emotional and unfit to lead. Every word landed like a stone dropping into still water, ripples of shock and disgust spreading through the assembled crowd. When Marco finally finished, his voice hoarse and his face gray with blood loss, the silence stretched so long that Vivian could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. Then Lucien spoke. My uncle orchestrated all of this because he believed I was making the organization weak by pushing for reform, by ending the trafficking operations, by cleaning up the corruption my father built his empire on. Lucien's voice carried across the warehouse, cold and precise. He thought sentiment made me vulnerable, that caring about an innocent woman meant I'd lost the ruthlessness necessary to lead. He paused, letting the words settle. He was wrong. Lucien gestured and 2 guards dragged Marco toward the exit. My uncle will be placed on medical transport to a secure facility outside the city. He'll receive treatment for his wounds, and then he'll retire from active involvement in the organization's affairs, permanently. Not death then, but exile. In this world, maybe that was worse. Marco's eyes locked on Lucien as he was hauled past. You think this makes you better than your father? You think showing mercy proves something? No. Lucien's expression remained cold. I think it proves I'm smart enough to learn from his mistakes. He ruled through fear and violence, and look where that got him, dead at 62 with enemies circling and an empire built on sand. I'm building something that lasts. By going soft. By being strategic, Lucien cut him off. Fear is expensive, Uncle. It requires constant maintenance, constant violence, constant proof that you're still the biggest monster in the room. Respect is cheaper. Respect makes people want to follow you instead of just being too scared not to. He turned away from Marco, addressing the assembled men instead. I know many of you shared my uncle's concerns. You wondered if I was compromising what made this organization powerful. If reform meant weakness. Lucien's gaze swept across the crowd, making contact with dozens of hard faces. Tonight should put those concerns to rest. I identified the threat, neutralized it without starting a war, and I'm still standing here. That's not weakness. That's efficiency. Someone in the back started clapping, then another. Within seconds, the entire warehouse erupted in applause. Not enthusiastic, not warm, but solid and certain. The sound of men acknowledging power when they saw it. Lucien let it continue for a moment, then raised one hand for silence. The vote, he said simply. 3 men moved to the table at the front, older members of the organization, arbiters chosen to ensure fairness. One of them stood, holding a tablet. All those in favor of maintaining Lucien Moretti as head of operations signify. Hands rose throughout the crowd. Vivian tried to count, but lost track after 40. More than half, definitely. Maybe 3/4. Opposed? A scattered handful of hands, maybe 10, loyalists to Marco or men too proud to change their position even after hearing the truth. The motion carries, the arbiter announced. Lucien Moretti remains in charge. This meeting is concluded. Just like that, it was over. The warehouse began emptying, men filing out in groups, already talking among themselves about what this meant, how the power structure would shift, who'd come out ahead, and who'd need to scramble to maintain their positions. Vivian stood frozen near the entrance, watching Lucien shake hands and exchange quiet words with various members of his organization. He looked completely in control, commanding respect, projecting strength, every inch the powerful boss who'd just survived a coup attempt. But Vivian noticed the small things others might miss. The tightness around his eyes, the way his jaw clenched between conversations, the exhaustion carved into the lines of his face. This had cost him, maybe not his position, but something. Vincent appeared at Vivian's elbow. "Ms. Carter, we should get you back to the penthouse. It's safer." "I'm staying with Lucien," she said firmly. Vincent glanced at his boss, then back at Vivian, and something like approval flickered across his professional mask. "Of course. I'll have the car ready when you're ready to leave." It took another 20 minutes for Lucien to finish his obligations, reassuring allies, accepting congratulations, making it clear to everyone that tonight's events wouldn't be repeated. By the time he finally extracted himself from the crowd, his shoulders had tensed with barely concealed tension. He found Vivian waiting near the exit, and something in his expression cracked when he saw her. Just for a moment, just long enough for her to see how much tonight had cost him. "Let's go home," he said quietly. The drive back to this penthouse passed in loaded silence. Lucien sat beside Vivian in the back of the SUV, his hand finding hers in the darkness, fingers threading together with desperate strength. He didn't speak, didn't need to. The grip of his hand said everything, relief and exhaustion, and the kind of bone-deep weariness that came from fighting too many battles in too short a time. When they finally reached the penthouse, Lucien dismissed the guards with a curt nod, rode up the elevator alone with Vivian, and walked straight to the windows overlooking Chicago. He stood there for a long time, hands in his pockets, staring at the city lights. Vivian waited. She'd learned enough about Lucien to know he'd speak when he was ready. "I almost lost tonight," he said finally. "If you hadn't figured out Marco was playing you, if you'd given him what he wanted, or if you'd just stayed passive and let him take control of the situation, he would have ambushed me, killed me, and taken over the organization, all because I got distracted by—" He stopped, jaw working. "By me," Vivian finished. "By caring about you." Lucien turned around, and the raw emotion in his face made her breath catch. Marco was right about one thing. You are a weakness. The biggest one I've ever had. Because for the first time in my entire life, I have something to lose that isn't power or money or territory. I have someone who makes me want to be better than the monster my father raised. He crossed to her, hands framing her face with devastating gentleness. "And that terrifies me," Lucien whispered, "because I don't know how to protect something this fragile. I don't know how to keep you safe in a world designed to destroy anything I care about." Vivian's throat tightened. "You can't keep me completely safe. That's not how life works." "I know, but I need to try. Even if it's impossible, even if it means constantly looking over my shoulder and second-guessing every decision and driving myself insane trying to anticipate every possible threat." His thumbs brushed her cheekbones. "Because losing you would break something in me I wouldn't recover from." "Then don't lose me." Vivian covered his hands with hers. "Stop trying to protect me from everything and just let me stay. Let me choose this life, knowing all the risks. Let me be strong enough to handle it." "What if you're not? Then I'll figure it out." She pulled his hands down, holding them between them. "But Lucien, you have to stop treating me like I'm made of glass. I grabbed your arm at that party knowing exactly how insane it was. I moved into your penthouse after being followed by gunmen. I walked into a Mafia meeting wearing body armor. I'm not some delicate civilian who needs constant protection. I'm someone who chose you with open eyes, knowing the cost." Lucien stared at her for a long moment, something like wonder bleeding through his exhaustion. "How are you real?" "I ask myself the same thing about you." He kissed her then, not desperate or urgent like before, but slow and deep and tasting like promises neither of them knew if they could keep. Vivian melted into it, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer until there was no space left between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lucien rested his forehead against hers. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly, "about that video Marco sent you. You already explained not all of it." Lucien pulled back slightly, meeting her eyes. "That conversation was staged, yes, but the part about making a clean break after tonight? That was real." Vivian's stomach dropped. "What? Before Marco forced my hand, before all of this exploded, my plan was to win the vote and then arrange for you to return to teaching somewhere safe. Somewhere far from Chicago, far from my enemies, with security watching over you from a distance, but no visible connection to me." His jaw tightened. "I was going to let you go, Vivian, for your own good, because I genuinely believed that was the only way to keep you alive." The confession hit like cold water. "You were going to make that choice for me." "Yes." "Without asking what I wanted." "Yes." No apology, no excuse, just brutal honesty. Vivian pulled away from him, needing space to process. "So what changed?" "You did." Lucian's voice roughened. "You proved tonight that you're not someone who needs saving. You brought Marco to me instead of running. You made split-second decisions under pressure that saved both our lives. You walked into that warehouse like you belonged there and didn't flinch even when the most dangerous men in Chicago were staring at you." He moved closer, though he didn't touch her this time. "I realized something watching you tonight," Lucien continued. "I've been so focused on protecting you from my world that I didn't see you'd already chosen it. You weren't a victim who got dragged into this. You were someone who looked at all the danger and chaos and violence and decided you wanted to stay anyway. And that kind of strength, that kind of stubborn, reckless courage, that's not something I have the right to take away by making decisions for you." Vivian's anger softened slightly. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying the choice is yours. Really yours this time, with no manipulation or half-truths or me deciding what's best for you." Lucien's dark eyes held hers. "You can go back to teaching. I'll make sure Washington Elementary reinstates you, or I'll help you find a position somewhere else. I'll arrange security that's invisible but effective. You can have your normal life back, and I'll stay away except for making sure you're safe. Or you stay here with me, in this insane, dangerous life where I can't promise you'll always be safe, but I can promise I'll fight like hell to protect you. Where you'll have to deal with bodyguards and security protocols and the constant knowledge that my enemies will always see you as leverage. Where normal things like going to movies or grocery shopping require planning and armed escorts." He paused, vulnerability bleeding through his control. "But if you stay," Lucien said quietly, "you'll also have me. All of me. Not the cleaned-up version I thought you deserved, but the actual person, flaws and violence and trauma, and all the ways I'm still trying to be better than my father. And Vivian, I need you to know, I don't have a roadmap for this. I don't know how to be in a relationship. I don't know how to balance caring about someone with running a criminal organization. I'll probably fuck it up constantly." "Probably," Vivian agreed. "So what do you want?" She looked at him standing there in his expensive suit with exhaustion carved into his face and blood still visible on his collar from Marco's wounds and vulnerability written across his expression for the first time since she'd met him. Then she looked around the penthouse, this strange in-between space that wasn't quite home but wasn't quite prison either. Finally, she looked inside herself at the person she'd become over the past week. Not the careful third-grade teacher who alphabetized her spice rack and played it safe. Someone newer. Someone who'd discovered that safety was overrated and taking risks sometimes led to finding things worth fighting for. "I want to stay," Vivian said, "but I need to do something first." Lucien's expression shifted. Hope and fear mixed together. "What?" "I need to resign from Washington Elementary. Properly. In person." She held up a hand when Lucien started to protest. "Not because you're making me. Because I can't go back there. Even if the school board reinstates me, even if Marco's threats disappear, I can't walk into that classroom and teach those kids while constantly looking over my shoulder. They deserve better than a teacher who's half present because she's worried about danger following her home." "Vivian, yung ba sit pa pauan?" I'm not giving up teaching. Her voice strengthened. I'm just giving up teaching there. There are other schools, other ways to make a difference. But staying at Washington would be selfish. It would put those kids at risk just so I could pretend my life hasn't changed. And it has changed, Lucien. Fundamentally, I changed the moment I grabbed your arm. He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, we'll go together tomorrow. You'll resign, and then we figure out what comes next. Vivian closed the distance between them. Together, as actual partners who make decisions together instead of you constantly trying to protect me from reality. That's going to be really hard for me. I know. I'm going to fail at it constantly. I know that too. Lucien's hands found her waist, pulling her against him. You're sure about this? Because once you're all the way in, there's no going back to normal. My enemies will know who you are. Your life will never be simple again. My life stopped being simple the moment you played along with my lie. Vivian's hose slid up his chest to rest against his shoulders. And honestly, I don't want simple anymore. Simple is boring. Simple is safe. Simple is waking up at 40 and realizing you never took a single risk worth remembering. This is one hell of a risk. Good. He kissed her again, and this time it felt different. Not desperate or urgent or weighted with goodbye. This kiss tasted like beginning, messy and uncertain and probably doomed but real in a way that made Vivian's chest ache. When they finally broke apart, Lucien kept her close, his arms wrapped around her like he was afraid she'd disappear if he let go. Thank you, he whispered into her hair. For what? For being brave enough to choose this. For not running when any sensible person would have. For making me think I might actually deserve something good for once. Vivian pulled back enough to look at his face. You don't deserve me because you're good, Lucien. You deserve me because you're trying, because you're fighting to be better than the person you were raised to be. That's harder than just being good from the start. Something in his expression cracked completely, and for just a moment Vivian saw the boy who'd watched his mother leave when he was 7. The teenager who'd realized he'd never escape the life chosen for him. The man carrying decades of violence and trying to figure out how to build something cleaner from the ruins. I love you, Lucien said, the words rough and unpracticed, like he'd never said them before. I don't know if that means anything coming from someone like me, but it's true. Vivian's eyes burned. It means everything coming from someone like you because you don't say things you don't mean. No, I don't. Then I love you too, even though you're impossible and controlling and probably going to drive me crazy trying to protect me from every possible danger. Probably. His mouth twitched. Definitely. They stood there holding each other while Chicago glittered beyond the windows. Two people who'd crashed into each other's lives with spectacular chaos and somehow decided to make it work anyway. Eventually, exhaustion pulled them toward sleep. They collapsed in Lucien's massive bed. Not the guest room, not separate spaces, but together in the tangle of expensive sheets and shared warmth. Lucien fell asleep almost immediately, his arm heavy across Vivian's waist, his breathing evening out into something peaceful for the first time in days. Vivian lay awake longer, staring at the ceiling and processing everything that had happened. A week ago, she'd been a third-grade teacher whose biggest problem was making it through parent-teacher conferences without crying. Now she was lying beside a Mafia boss who just survived a coup attempt, planning to resign from her job and step fully into a world she barely understood. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt oddly calm, like she'd finally stopped fighting against the current and let it carry her somewhere unexpected but right. Morning came too early, sunlight streaming through the windows Lucien had forgotten to close. Vivian woke to find him already awake, watching her with an expression caught somewhere between contentment and disbelief. "Hi," she said, her voice rough with sleep. "Hi." He brushed hair away from her face. "Sleep okay?" "Better than I have in days." Vivian stretched, feeling the bulletproof vest's impression still imprinted on her ribs. "What time is it?" 8:30. We don't have to go to the school until you're ready." Right. The resignation, the formal ending of her old life. Vivian sat up, suddenly nervous. What do I even say? "Sorry, I got involved with organized crime, and it's too dangerous for me to teach your children anymore?" You say you're pursuing other opportunities, that you're grateful for the experience, but it's time to move on. Lucien sat up beside her, shoulder pressed against hers. They don't need to know the rest. What if they ask questions? Then Vincent handles it. That's what I pay him for. The casual certainty in his voice made Vivian almost laugh. This was her life now. Lawyers on retainer to handle inconvenient questions, security guards escorting her to resign from teaching positions, conversations about which parts of the truth could be safely shared. Absolutely insane. They dressed carefully for the meeting, Vivian in professional slacks and a blouse that made her look like a responsible educator, Lucien in a suit that made him look like a wealthy businessman instead of a crime boss. Vincent met them in the lobby with paperwork already prepared, resignation letter typed up and ready for Vivian's signature. The principal has been notified you're coming, Vincent said as they drove toward Washington Elementary. She's agreed to keep the meeting brief and private. Did you threaten her? Vivian asked. I suggested that discretion would be appreciated. Vincent's expression remained professionally neutral. Whether she took that as a threat is her interpretation. Lucien squeezed Vivian's hand. You don't have to do this. We can still... I want to. Vivian cut him off gently. This is my choice. Let me make it. Washington Elementary looked exactly the same as it had a week ago. Red brick building, playground equipment visible behind the fence, colorful student artwork decorating the windows. Vivian felt a pang of loss looking at it, remembering all the small joys that came with teaching, Jaden's wild stories, Sophia's quiet brilliance, Marcus's determination despite everything working against him. But she couldn't go back. That door had closed the moment she'd chosen Lucien. Principal Harrison met them in her office, a tired woman in her 50s who'd spent 30 years in education and looked like she'd seen everything. But when Lucien walked in behind Vivian, something flickered across her face. Recognition, maybe. Or just awareness that this wasn't a normal resignation. Ms. Carter, the principal gestured to the chairs across from her desk. Please, sit. Vivian sat. Lucien remained standing behind her chair, a silent presence radiating controlled power. I'll be brief, Vivian said, her voice steadier than she expected. I'm resigning effective immediately. I know that creates difficulties with finding a replacement mid-year, and I'm sorry for the disruption, but I can't continue teaching here. Personal reasons. Principal Harrison studied her face for a long moment. Does this have anything to do with the school board investigation? The investigation was resolved, Vincent interjected smoothly. All allegations were found to be baseless, and the matter is closed. I see. The principal's gaze shifted to Lucien, then back to Vivian. You're a good teacher, Ms. Carter. Your students will miss you. I'll miss them too. Vivian's throat tightened. But this is the right decision. For you or for them? The question hit harder than expected. Vivian took a breath, choosing her words carefully. Both. They deserve a teacher who can be fully present, who isn't dealing with complications that might affect their safety or education. And I deserve to pursue a path that doesn't require pretending my life hasn't changed. Principal Harrison nodded slowly, like that answer made more sense than she wanted to admit. All right, I'll need you to sign the formal resignation papers, and we'll arrange for your personal items to be packed and sent to whatever address you provide. Thank you. The paperwork took 15 minutes. Vivian signed her name on 3 different documents, officially severing her connection to Washington Elementary. When it was done, Principal Harrison stood and extended her hand. I hope you find what you're looking for, Miss Carter. I already have, Vivian said quietly. They left through the same doors Vivian had entered every morning for the past 3 years. As they walked toward the car, Vivian caught sight of her classroom window on the 2nd floor. Empty now, waiting for whoever would replace her. Some other teacher who'd inherit her students, her lesson plans, her carefully organized classroom library. A chapter closing. You okay? Lucien asked quietly as they drove away. Yeah. Vivian wiped at her eyes. Yeah, I think I am. It's just ending. Really ending. Something else will begin. I know. She looked at him. What happens now? Now. Lucien's hand found hers again. Now we figure out what your life looks like without teaching. Maybe you find a new school district outside Chicago. Maybe you work with education nonprofits. Maybe you do something completely different. The world's open, Vivian. You get to choose. What if I don't know what I want? Then we figure it out together. No rush, no pressure, just time and space to decide who you want to be now. Vivian leaned her head against his shoulder, watching Chicago pass by the window. I never thought my life would look like this. Like what? Complicated, dangerous, uncertain, but exciting. She paused. Real. Real, Lucien repeated. Yeah, that's a good word for it. They drove in comfortable silence back toward the penthouse. When they arrived, Lucien dismissed the security detail and led Vivian up to the apartment alone. I have something for you, he said once they were inside. Wait here. He disappeared into his office, returning a moment later with a small velvet box. Vivian's heart stuttered. Lucien, it's not a ring. He opened the box, revealing a key on a simple silver chain. It's yours. The penthouse. I'm having it legally transferred into your name. The deed, the title, everything. So if anything happens to me, you have somewhere secure to live. Somewhere that's yours, not borrowed, not dependent on me still being alive. Vivian stared at the key, overwhelmed. That's too much. It's not enough. Lucien took the chain and fastened it around her neck, the key settling against her collarbone. You gave up your career, your safety, your entire normal life to choose this. The least I can do is make sure you have somewhere to land if I'm not around to catch you. Stop talking about dying. I'm a realist. But his hands lingered on her shoulders, warmth bleeding through his pragmatism. Besides, I'm not planning on going anywhere. But plans change. People like me don't retire peacefully to Florida, so I need to know you're protected, that you'll be okay. Vivian turned to face him fully, her hands coming up to frame his face. Listen to me. I didn't choose this life because I wanted security. I chose it because I wanted you. Flawed, dangerous, impossible you. So stop trying to protect me from the consequences of my own decisions and just be here. Be present. Let us figure out how to make this work together instead of constantly preparing for the worst. Lucien closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. That's harder than it sounds. I know, but try anyway. Okay? His eyes opened, dark and honest. I'll try. They stood there in the penthouse that was now legally Vivian's, holding each other while the city hummed below. Two people who'd found each other in chaos and decided to build something from the wreckage. 3 months later, Vivian stood in front of a classroom again. Not Washington Elementary, not even the same part of Chicago, but a small private school on the north side that specialized in students who'd fallen through the cracks elsewhere. Kids with learning disabilities, behavioral issues, traumatic backgrounds. The kind of students who needed someone willing to see past their problems to their potential. The kind of teaching that actually mattered. Lucien had helped arrange the position through discreet channels, using his connections without being obvious about it. The school board didn't know who backed their newest teacher's hire. They just knew Vivian Carter came with impeccable references and a genuine passion for working with difficult students. And she was good at it. Better than she'd expected. These kids needed someone who understood that life was complicated and messy, and sometimes the rules didn't apply the way they should. Someone who'd made questionable choices herself and come out the other side stronger. Vivian was that person now. Her relationship with Lucien had settled into something that almost resembled normal. If normal included armed guards outside her new apartment, regular security briefings, and the occasional emergency where Lucien had to disappear for days to handle some crisis in his organization. But there were also quiet moments. Sunday mornings drinking coffee in Rosa's rebuilt cafe, which Lucien had restored as a memorial and kept operating under her family's management. Date nights at hidden restaurants where they could be just two people instead of a mafia boss and his complicated girlfriend. Late-night conversations about everything and nothing while Chicago glittered beyond the windows. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And real, Vivian had learned, was worth more than perfect ever could be. 6 months after the warehouse vote, Lucien took Vivian back to the Blackthorn estate for another gala. Same crystal chandeliers, same wealthy crowd, same false smiles hiding brutal ambition. But this time, Vivian walked in on Lucien's arm openly. No pretense, no lies, just two people who'd chosen each other despite every logical reason not to. Ethan was there with Claire, both of them looking uncomfortable when they spotted Vivian and Lucien entering together. They kept their distance all evening, which was fine with Vivian. That chapter of her life felt like ancient history now. You know what's funny? Vivian said as they danced beneath the same chandeliers where their charade had started. A year ago, I would have done anything to make Ethan regret leaving me, to prove I was worth something. And now? Now I don't care what he thinks. Because I already know what I'm worth. She looked up at Lucien. And I know what you're worth, too, despite everything people say about you. Lucien's arms tightened around her waist. What am I worth? Everything. Vivian said it simply, honestly. You're worth every complicated, dangerous, impossible moment. You're worth choosing over safety. You're worth fighting for. Something in Lucien's expression cracked, that careful control he maintained in public slipping just enough to show the man underneath. I don't deserve you. Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his entire face, and kissed her right there on the dance floor with half of Chicago's elite watching. Let them watch, Vivian thought. Let them whisper and speculate and judge. Let them think whatever they wanted about the third-grade teacher who'd somehow ended up with one of the most dangerous men in the city. She knew the truth, that sometimes the worst decisions led to the best outcomes, that grabbing a stranger's arm at a party could change your entire life, that love didn't have to be safe to be real, and that the most dangerous thing Lucien Moretti had ever done wasn't building a criminal empire or surviving countless enemies or reforming decades of corruption. It was falling in love with a woman who'd accidentally chosen him when she'd been desperate enough to lie. A woman who'd looked at all the darkness surrounding him and decided to stay anyway. A woman who proved that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was choose the complicated, messy, beautiful disaster over the safe, predictable, comfortable lie. As they swayed together beneath the glittering lights, Vivian caught sight of Maya across the ballroom. Her friend raised her champagne glass in a subtle toast, acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, Vivian had known what she was doing all along. Or maybe she'd just gotten incredibly lucky. Either way, Vivian wasn't letting go. What are you thinking about? Lucien asked quietly. That night, Vivian said, when I grabbed your arm and started this whole mess. Regret it? She pulled back to look at his face, the sharp features, the dark eyes, the mouth that rarely smiled but transformed when it did. She thought about everything they'd survived together. Rosa's death, Marco's betrayal, the warehouse vote, her resignation, the slow, difficult work of building something real from chaos. Not for a second, Vivian said, and she meant it, because the woman who'd grabbed a stranger's arm in desperate humiliation was gone, replaced by someone stronger, braver, more willing to fight for what mattered, someone who'd learned that the most dangerous lies weren't the ones you told others. They were the ones you told yourself about who you were supposed to be. And the moment Vivian stopped lying to herself, the moment she admitted she was tired of being invisible and safe and perfectly appropriate, her real life had finally begun. In the arms of the most dangerous man she'd ever met, who turned out to be exactly what she needed. The song ended. Applause rippled through the ballroom. Lucien kept Vivian close for an extra heartbeat, his hand warm against her spine, his breath stirring her hair. Ready to go home? He asked. Yes, Vivian smiled. Take me home. They left the Blackthorn estate together, walking out into the Chicago night with the city lights reflecting off the lake and possibilities stretching ahead of them like an open road. Behind them, the ballroom continued spinning, the same fake smiles, the same hidden agendas, the same endless performance of wealth and power. But Vivian and Lucien had stepped outside that world, into something messier and more honest and infinitely more real, into a future neither of them could have predicted but both were willing to fight for, together. And maybe that was the whole point, not the fairy tale ending where everything worked out perfectly, but the real ending where two imperfect people chose each other anyway, where a desperate lie turned into an impossible truth, where a third-grade teacher and a mafia boss proved that sometimes the wrong person at the wrong time turned out to be exactly right. And years later, when people asked Vivian Carter how she'd ended up with someone like Lucien Moretti, she'd smile and tell them the truth. She grabbed his arm at a party, and he decided to hold on, and neither of them had let go since. Because that's what you did when you found something worth keeping. You held on. Through the danger and the chaos and the impossible complications, through the fear and the doubt and the voices telling you to run, you held on And you built something real from the wreckage of who you used to be. Together. Always together. That was their story. And it was finally beautifully complete.